Listen closely, for I'm about to tell you a story that still echoes through the valleys of Deerwater when the campfires burn low and the moon hangs heavy in the night sky. Some call it a tale of greed, others a tale of justice, but those who know better understand it's really about faith, the kind that holds steady when every voice around you whispers, "Impossible." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was there when it all unfolded, watched it with my own eyes. In the summer of 1883, and though decades have passed, I remember it as clearly as yesterday's sunrise. The story of Rebecca Miller and the lost Whispering Peaks mine has been told 100 different ways, but few know the truth of what really happened in those fateful months when a woman's conviction shook the very foundations of Copper Ridge and changed the course of history for an entire valley. Copper Ridge wasn't always the bustling town you see today. Back then, it was dying, a place where dreams came to wither and fade like autumn leaves. The copper veins that had given the settlement its name and purpose had run dry years before, leaving nothing but abandoned shafts and hollow-eyed men who'd once believed fortune was just one swing of the pickaxe away. Main Street was a single dusty thoroughfare lined with weathered buildings, half of them boarded up. The Grand Hotel wasn't grand at all, just a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint. The saloon, the Copper Nugget, did more business than the church and general store combined. Sheriff Grant's office sat at the far end, a place most folks avoided unless absolutely necessary. But beneath the surface of that dying town lay something that would make men kill or die for: gold. Not the flecks that desperate panners still searched for in nearby streams, but a motherlode so rich it would make the California strikes look like mere pockets of dust. At least, that's what Rebecca Miller claimed, and that claim made her either the town madwoman or its greatest hope, depending on who you asked. I first laid eyes on Rebecca when she arrived on the dusty afternoon stage from Boston. She didn't look like much, a slender woman of 26 with auburn hair tucked sensibly beneath a plain bonnet, wearing a travel-worn dress that had once been fine, but now showed the signs of long journeys and harder times. Nothing about her appearance suggested the storm she was about to unleash. Harold Jenkins was there too, sweeping the boardwalk in front of his general store, his weathered face creased with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent too many years peering into the distance. "Another fool come to die in the dust," he muttered as the stage pulled away, leaving Rebecca standing alone with her two modest trunks. How wrong he would prove to be. Rebecca took a room at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, paid 2 months in advance with coins that clinked with the distinctive sound of genuine silver. She kept to herself those first few days, walking the town, studying the abandoned mines, making notes in a leather-bound journal that never left her possession. People noticed, of course. In a place like Copper Ridge, a new face, especially a woman's face, was cause for speculation. The whispers started almost immediately. Thomas Miller's daughter, Martha Jenkins, informed her sewing circle with the authority of someone who'd appointed herself keeper of the town's knowledge. Come to settle her father's affairs, I expect. Old Thomas Miller had been a legend in these parts, a prospector with wild eyes and wilder claims. He'd spent 20 years searching for a gold mine he swore existed, though no one had ever seen evidence of it. He died 3 months earlier, alone in a cabin up in Black Mesa, leaving nothing behind but debts and delusions, or so everyone thought. It was on her 5th day in town that Rebecca made her first move. She walked into Sheriff Grant's office just as the noon sun reached its peak, casting harsh shadows across the weathered boardwalks. Through the window, I watched her stride inside, straight-backed and determined. Sheriff William Grant wasn't a bad man, just a practical one. 15 years wearing a tin star in a dying town had taught him to bend when necessary. especially when the pressure came from men like Maxwell Prescott. Prescott was the owner of the Silver Peak Mining Company, the man who'd bought up every failing claim in Copper Ridge for pennies on the dollar. He controlled the region now, the mines, the supply routes, even the water rights to Creek Rush that flowed through the valley. His mansion stood on the hill overlooking town, a daily reminder of who held power in Deerwater Valley. "I'm here to register a claim," Rebecca announced, her voice carrying through the open door and into the street where curious ears perked up. The sheriff studied her with tired eyes. "Mining claim?" "Yes, the Whispering Peaks mine." A heavy silence followed her words. Everyone in town knew about Whispering Peaks, Thomas Miller's mythical gold mine, the fever dream that had consumed him. The mine no one believed existed. "Miss Miller," Sheriff Grant said slowly, removing his hat and placing it on the desk between them, "your father spent 20 years chasing that claim. With all due respect to his memory, there is no Whispering Peaks mine." Rebecca's response was to place a folded document on his desk. "My father's original claim, filed in 1863, never invalidated, never expired. I've come to work it." The sheriff unfolded the yellowed paper, studying it with narrowed eyes. "This claim was filed, yes, but no gold was ever found. Your father never officially recorded a strike because he was protecting it," Rebecca countered. "He found it, Sheriff. Just before he died, he sent me proof." That was when the whispers truly began, whispers that would soon grow into a roar. By nightfall, every soul in Copper Ridge had heard Rebecca Miller's claim, and by morning, most had dismissed it as the delusion of a daughter who couldn't accept her father's failure. Most, but not all. Dr. Sarah Bennett was the first to openly ally herself with Rebecca. The town's physician was herself an oddity, a woman doctor in a place where female professionals were as rare as desert rainfall. She'd come to Copper Ridge 5 years earlier, fleeing something in her past that no one dared ask about. Her medical skills had eventually earned the town's grudging respect, though she remained an outsider in many ways. "They thought I was crazy too," she told Rebecca over tea in her small office behind the apothecary. "Seems to be a prerequisite for women who dare to have convictions in places like this." Rebecca studied the doctor's face, finding kinship in her steady gaze. "Did you know my father? I treated him several times. Pneumonia 2 winters ago, then a broken arm last summer after a fall." Dr. Bennett poured more tea. He spoke often of his mine. Most thought him touched by the sun, but there was a clarity in his eyes when he described it that made me wonder. "It exists," Rebecca said simply, "and I intend to prove it. That will make you enemies," the doctor warned. "Powerful ones." She was right, of course. News travels fast in small towns, faster still when carried on the winds of greed. It took less than 2 days for Maxwell Prescott to hear of Rebecca's claim, and less than 3 for him to arrive in town to address this unexpected problem. Prescott didn't look like a villain from a penny dreadful. That was what made him dangerous. He was a handsome man in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of Eastern money and influence. He moved with the confidence of someone who rarely heard the word no, and when he smiled, his eyes remained cold as January frost. He came to Copper Ridge with his son Charles, a younger, harder version of himself, and 4 men who might have been called guards by the charitable or thugs by the honest. Their first stop was the sheriff's office. "This claim is a nuisance, William," Prescott said, examining the document Rebecca had filed. "The ramblings of old Thomas Miller's equally unhinged daughter." Sheriff Grant shifted uncomfortably. "The paperwork appears to be in order, Mr. Prescott. If she wants to waste her time searching for a mine that doesn't exist, that's her right." Prescott's smile tightened. You and I both know what would happen if someone actually found gold in this region. The rush would destroy everything we've built. Chaos, lawlessness, the systematic development of Deerwater Valley would be set back decades. What he meant, though didn't say, was that his monopoly would be threatened, his control weakened. "I'll handle Miss Miller," Prescott concluded, folding the document and sliding it into his vest pocket. "Just ensure there are no unnecessary complications." Later that day, Rebecca was taking measurements near the abandoned Cooper shaft when a shadow fell across her work. She looked up to find Maxwell Prescott standing there, flanked by his son and two of his men. "Miss Miller," he said, tipping, his hat with practiced courtesy. "Maxwell Prescott, Silver Peak Mining Company. I understand you're pursuing one of your father's old claims." Rebecca stood, brushing dust from her skirts. Up close, Prescott could see that her eyes weren't the soft, malleable eyes of someone easily intimidated. They were sharp, observant, and unafraid. "Mr. Prescott, your reputation precedes you, as does yours, it seems. The dedicated daughter, determined to prove her father wasn't a fool." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His voice carried false sympathy. "A noble sentiment, but I fear you're wasting your time and resources." "My time and resources are mine to waste," she replied evenly. Prescott's smile never wavered. "Indeed. However, I have an alternative to propose. Silver Peak would be willing to purchase your claim, sight unseen, for a generous sum. Say $5,000. The amount was substantial, enough to set up a comfortable life elsewhere. Many would have grabbed it without hesitation. Rebecca didn't even blink. "The claim isn't for sale. 10,000, Prescott countered smoothly. "More than fair for an unproven claim based on an old man's fantasy." "My father wasn't a fantasist, Mr. Prescott. He was methodical, careful, and, above all, honest." Rebecca gathered her instruments. "Qualities I've heard are in short supply at Silver Peak." Charles Prescott stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun belt. "You do well to watch your tone when speaking to my father." Maxwell placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "We're simply having a business discussion, Charles. Miss Miller is entitled to her opinions." He turned back to Rebecca. "Think carefully about my offer. Prospecting is dangerous work, especially for a woman alone. Accidents happen in these mountains with alarming frequency." The threat lingered in the air between them, as tangible as the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. "Good day, Mr. Prescott," Rebecca replied, refusing to be cowed. "I have work to do." As the Prescotts departed, Rebecca returned to her measurements, but her hands trembled slightly. She understood now what she was truly up against, not just disbelief, but powerful interests determined to ensure her failure. That evening, as Rebecca returned to her room at the boarding house, she found it had been searched. Her belongings were superficially in place, but she could tell someone had been through them. The journal positioned slightly differently, her father's letters rearranged. Most telling, the floorboard beneath the bed where she'd hidden her most precious possession had been tampered with. She quickly checked the hiding place, relief flooding through her when she found the oilskin pouch still there, its contents undisturbed. Inside was half of a map, drawn in her father's precise hand, showing landmarks leading to the Whispering Peaks mine. Only half, though. Thomas Miller had been too cautious to send the complete map in one piece. The second half, according to his final letter, would come from an unexpected source. "When the time is right," he'd written, "seek the man they call Eagle Eye. He holds what you need to finish what I started." The attempted theft confirmed what Rebecca already suspected. Someone believed her claim might have merit. Far from discouraging her, It strengthened her resolve. The following morning brought a new development. Young Michael Thompson, the deputy sheriff, barely 22 years old, with earnest eyes and an awkward manner, approached Rebecca as she breakfasted at Mrs. Abernathy's. "Miss Miller," he said, removing his hat and twisting it nervously in his hands. "Might I have a word?" Rebecca gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sheriff Grant wanted me to mention, unofficial-like," Thompson continued in a lowered voice, "that the Prescotts were asking about any, documents your father might have left behind, maps or journals or such." "I see," Rebecca said carefully. "And what did the sheriff tell them?" "That he didn't know of any, but—" Thompson hesitated, glancing around the empty dining room. "My pa worked alongside your father years back, before the copper played out. He always said Thomas Miller wasn't crazy, just private. Said if anyone could find gold in these hills, it'd be him." Rebecca studied the young deputy, weighing his sincerity. "Thank you, Deputy Thompson." "Michael, ma'am, and I just wanted you to know, not everyone's against you. It was a small alliance, but in a town where most viewed her with skepticism or outright hostility, it mattered." As the days passed, Rebecca established a routine. Each morning, she would ride out to different locations in the Black Mesa Range, taking samples, making measurements, consulting the half map she possessed. Each evening, she would return to town, where whisperers tracked her movements and speculated about her sanity. "Just like her father," they would say, "touched in the head, seeing gold where there's nothing but stone." But Rebecca knew what they didn't, that her father had found something extraordinary. His final letter arrived just days after news of his death had contained not just the half map, but a small leather pouch. Inside were 3 gold nuggets, larger and purer than any previously found in the territory. "Not flakes or dust, Becca," he'd written. "The real article, and plenty. More where these came from, but dangerous knowledge in dangerous hands. Trust no one until you find Eagle Eye." A week into her search, the first accident occurred. Rebecca was working an exploratory trench near the base of Thunder Canyon when a cascade of rocks came, tumbling down the slope, missing her by mere feet. She looked up to see 2 riders disappearing over the ridge, one of them wearing the distinctive hat she recognized as belonging to Charles Prescott. That night, Dr. Bennett cleaned a gash on Rebecca's temple where a stray rock had struck her. "They'll try again," the doctor said matter-of-factly. "Men like the Prescotts don't accept defeat gracefully." "I know." Rebecca winced as the antiseptic stung. "You need allies, Rebecca. Real ones, not just sympathizers." "I need to find Eagle Eye," she admitted, sharing the cryptic instruction from her father's letter. Dr. Bennett's hands stilled. "Eagle Eye Red Horse. The Comanche scout. You know him. Of him. He guided for the army years back, then for hunting parties. Has a reputation for knowing every inch of this territory." The doctor's expression grew concerned, but he hasn't been seen much since the trouble at Fort Wilson. They say he lives alone up in the high country, keeps to himself. "Can you help me find him?" Dr. Bennett considered this. "Samuel Wilson might know. He was a scout himself before losing his leg in the Apache campaigns, lives with his daughter at the edge of town." The next day, Rebecca sought out Samuel Wilson. His small cabin sat apart from the main settlement, surrounded by a well-tended vegetable garden. His daughter Lizzie, a striking young woman with sun-browned skin and capable hands, met Rebecca at the door with suspicious eyes. "We don't take charity," she said flatly. "I'm not offering any," Rebecca replied. "I'm looking for information about a man called Eagle Eye Red Horse." Lizzie's expression didn't change, but she stepped aside to allow Rebecca entry. Inside, Samuel Wilson sat by the fireplace, his missing leg evident by the empty space below his right knee. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands still strong, despite his 60-plus years. "The Miller girl," he said without looking up. "Come about Thomas's wild mine, have you?" "In a manner of speaking," Rebecca answered. "I need to find Jacob Redhorse." The old scout's knife paused. "Most folks who go looking for Eagle Eye don't find him. He finds them, if he's of a mind to. My father told me to seek him out, said he holds something I need." Wilson set down his carving and finally looked at her, his weathered face thoughtful. Thomas and Jacob had a history, not always friendly, mind you, but there was respect there. "Can you help me reach him?" Wilson exchanged a glance with his daughter. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Lizzie can take you part of the way," he said finally, "to Eagle's Rest, the Comanche settlement in the High Valley. Jacob visits there sometimes to see his mother's people. After that, it's up to him whether he wants to be found." "When?" Rebecca pressed. "Tomorrow, first light." Wilson picked up his knife again. "But I warn you, Eagle Eye has no love for white folks these days, not since what happened at Fort Wilson. If he helps you, it won't be out of kindness." Rebecca nodded her thanks and turned to leave. "Miss Miller," Wilson called after her, "if your father really found what he claimed, be careful who learns of it. Gold makes devils of decent men and monsters of the rest." As she stepped back into the afternoon sunlight, Rebecca felt eyes on her. Across the street, Charles Prescott leaned against a hitching post, watching. He made no attempt to hide his surveillance, just tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. The message was clear. Her movements were being monitored, her actions tracked. If she led the Prescotts to the mine or to Eagle Eye, everything her father had worked for could be lost. That night, Rebecca made a show of retiring early to her room at the boarding house. Once darkness fell, she slipped out the back window, making her way to the stables, where Dr. Bennett waited with 2 saddled horses. "The Prescotts have men watching the main roads," the doctor warned, handing Rebecca the reins to a sturdy bay. "A mare. We'll need to take the creek bed north, then cut east through the old Hanson property." "You don't have to come," Rebecca said. "Being associated with me is dangerous enough already." Dr. Bennett's smile was grim. "I've been dangerous since the day I decided to become a doctor instead of someone's wife. Besides, I know the back trails better than most." They rode through the night, avoiding the main paths, keeping to shadows and ravines where hoofbeats would be muffled. By dawn, they had reached the rendezvous point, a lightning-struck oak that marked the boundary of the old Hanson farm. Lizzie. Wilson was waiting, mounted on a paint horse, a rifle balanced across her saddle. She nodded curtly at their arrival. "You weren't followed," she stated rather than asked. "Not that we could detect," Dr. Bennett replied. "Good. We ride east from here into the high country. 2 days to Eagle's Rest, if we push hard and the weather holds." Lizzie's eyes settled on Rebecca. "Last chance to turn back. Where we're going isn't friendly to outsiders." "I'm not turning back," Rebecca said firmly. Lizzie studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Your father had the same look. Stubborn as sun-baked clay. Let's ride." They traveled through terrain that grew increasingly rugged, following game, trails and ancient paths that didn't appear on any settler's map. Lizzie led with the confidence of someone born to the saddle, rarely speaking except to give necessary instructions. Late on the first day, as they made camp in a sheltered ravine, Rebecca finally asked the question that had been troubling her. What happened at Fort Wilson? Why does Eagle Eye avoid settlers now? Lizzie's expression hardened as she built the small, smokeless fire. That's his story to tell if he chooses. But you know. Everyone who was here 3 years ago knows, Lizzie replied. Eagle Eye was the best scout the army had, saved dozens of lives, settler and native alike, by preventing ambushes, finding water during the drought, keeping peace between worlds that didn't want peace. She fed small twigs to the growing flames. Then gold was discovered near the Comanche. Hunting grounds, not much, just enough to make greedy men greedier. The treaty lines were adjusted. When some of the Comanche protested, there was violence. Eagle Eye's sister was among those killed. By soldiers? Rebecca asked softly. By men wearing army blue, yes. Whether they were acting on orders or for themselves doesn't much matter. In the end, Eagle Eye had trusted the army, guided them, believed their promises of fair dealing. After that day, he turned his back on both worlds. The fire cast dancing shadows across Lizzie's solemn face. Some say he's gone wild. Others say he's the only sane one, seeing clearly what the rest of us pretend not to notice. Dr. Bennett spoke up from where she was arranging their bedrolls. "And what do you say?" Lizzie looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I say pain changes people, makes them hard to reach. But it doesn't erase what they know or who they were." She looked directly at Rebecca. "If your father truly befriended him, there must have been something worth befriending." The following day brought them into the high valleys where forests gave way to meadows dotted with wildflowers. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge and looked down upon Eagle's Rest, a small settlement of perhaps 20 lodges set beside a clear running stream. "Go no further," Lizzie announced. "Many know me here, but this is not my place to enter uninvited." "Then how do I—" Rebecca began. "They already know we're here." Lizzie nodded toward the settlement, where several figures had emerged. From the lodges, looking up at the ridge, "Go down alone, unarmed. If they allow you to approach, ask for Grey Feather. She is Eagle Eye's aunt and a wise woman. If anyone can help you find him, it's her." Rebecca dismounted, handing her reins to Dr. Bennett. She removed her gun belt and handed it to Lizzie. "We'll wait until sundown," Lizzie said, "if you haven't returned by then." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Some journeys had no turning back. Rebecca straightened her shoulders and began the descent into Eagle's Rest, acutely aware of the eyes tracking her progress. As she neared the first lodges, children who had been playing nearby scattered like startled birds, disappearing into doorways. A woman emerged from the largest lodge, elderly but straight-backed, her silver hair in 2 long braids, her face lined with the wisdom of decades. She wore a simple dress of soft leather adorned with intricate beadwork. Without speaking, she gestured for Rebecca to follow her inside. The interior of the lodge was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. A small fire burned in the center pit, filling the space with the sweet scent of pinon pine. The woman, Grey Feather, Rebecca presumed, seated herself on a woven mat and indicated Rebecca should do the same. "I've come seeking Jacob Redhorse," Rebecca said, when the silence had stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Grey Feather studied her with dark, penetrating eyes. "Many seek Eagle Eye, few find him. My father was Thomas Miller. Before he died, he told me to find Jacob." A flicker of recognition crossed the elder's face. "The one who listened to the mountains." Rebecca nodded, encouraged. "Yes, he sent me half of a map. Said Jacob holds what I need to complete it. The Gold Path," Grey Feather said. "Not a question, but a statement. Your father found it then?" "You knew?" "He came here many seasons ago, spoke with the elders about ancient stories, places where the earth bleeds yellow metal, places most avoid." The woman's gaze was steady. "Why do you seek this knowledge?" It was the question Rebecca had been asking herself since receiving her father's final letter. Not just what she sought, but why. "To prove he wasn't mad," she began, then stopped herself. That was true, but incomplete. "To finish what he started, to claim what rightfully belongs to our family." Grey Feather nodded slowly. "Truth, but not all of it. Look deeper." Rebecca closed her eyes, searching for the words to express what drove her. Because he believed in something everyone else dismissed. Because he saw value in what others overlooked. Because, her voice caught, because he asked me to trust him one last time. When she opened her eyes, Greyfeather was smiling faintly. Now you speak with your heart, not just your mouth. Good. Jacob will want to know your true purpose before he helps you. Then you'll take me to him? No need. A new voice entered the conversation, male, deep, with the faint accent of someone who moved between worlds. Rebecca turned to find a man standing in the lodge entrance. He was tall and lean, his black hair streaked with silver at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind. He wore buckskin trousers and a cotton shirt of settler make, but the beaded medicine pouch at his neck and the knife at his belt spoke of his Comanche heritage. Most striking were his eyes, dark and intense, missing nothing, earning him the name he carried. Eagle Eye, Rebecca breathed. Thomas Miller's daughter, he replied, stepping fully into the lodge. Come a long way to chase a dead man's dream. Not a dream, truth. Jacob Redhorse studied her with those unsettling eyes that seemed to see beneath surfaces to what lay hidden. We'll see, he said finally. We'll see what truths you're ready to face, Rebecca Miller. Jacob Redhorse circled Rebecca slowly, assessing her with the careful scrutiny of a man who had learned the hard way that appearances could deceive. The lodge remained quiet, save for the soft crackling of the fire and the distant voices of children playing outside. Your father spoke of you often, he said finally. Said you had his stubbornness, but your mother's sense. Rebecca felt a pang at the mention of her mother, who had passed when she was still a girl. You knew him well then? Well enough to distrust him at first, Jacob replied, his face impassive. Well enough to respect him at the end. Greyfeather had withdrawn to the edge of the lodge, observing their exchange with knowing eyes that had witnessed generations of human folly and wisdom. He sent me to you, Rebecca said, reaching into her pocket to withdraw the oilskin pouch. She carefully unfolded the half-map it contained. He said you have the piece that completes this. Jacob didn't reach for the map immediately. Instead, he seated himself across from her, the fire between them. Why should I help you find what so many would kill for? Gold brings nothing but suffering to these mountains. It's my birthright, Rebecca began, but stopped when she saw the hardening in his expression. She tried again, more honestly. My father spent his life searching for this mine. They mocked him, called him a fool, a madman. If it exists, I need to prove he was right all along. Truth doesn't need proof to be truth, Jacob said. The sun rises whether blind men acknowledge it or not. Rebecca leaned forward, earnestness in every line of her body. Then help me see what others are blind to. Jacob studied her for a long moment. Thomas said you would come, made me promise to watch for you. But he also made me promise to be certain of your heart before I revealed what I know. He reached beneath his shirt and withdrew a leather pouch, similar to Rebecca's. What will you do if you find whispering peaks? Have you thought beyond the moment of discovery? Rebecca hesitated. In truth, she had been so focused on proving her father right that she had given little thought to what would come after. I suppose I would stake my claim properly, work the mine. Alone? Against the likes of Maxwell Prescott and his kind? Jacob's voice held no mockery, just the practicality of someone who had seen how power operated in the territory. If necessary, she answered, lifting her chin. A ghost of a smile touched Jacob's lips. Thomas's daughter, indeed. He opened his pouch and withdrew a piece of parchment yellowed with age. Show me your half. Rebecca spread her portion of the map on the ground between them. Jacob placed his piece alongside it. The two halves aligned perfectly, creating a detailed map of Black Mesa and the surrounding territory. Landmarks were marked with precise notations in her father's distinctive hand, and a winding path was traced through treacherous terrain to a location marked simply with a small star. Whispering Peaks, Rebecca breathed. That's what your father called it, Jacob confirmed. The Comanche have another name, the place where stones sing. It has been known to my people for generations, though few venture there. Why? Some places hold power beyond what can be seen or touched. Your father understood this. He didn't just seek gold, he listened to what the mountains had to say. Grey Feather spoke up from her place at the edge of the lodge. The singing stones drove. Some men mad, others found wisdom there. The difference was not in the stones, but in the hearts of those who heard them. Rebecca studied the completed map, tracing the route with her finger. It's in Thunder Canyon, deep in the maze. Jacob nodded. A place few can navigate without becoming lost forever. That's why Thomas sought my help, not just for the map, but for guidance through the canyon itself. Will you guide me as you guided him? Rebecca asked directly. Jacob's face remained unreadable. Perhaps, but not. Yet first I must know if you are truly worthy of what you seek. He carefully refolded his half of the map and returned it to its pouch. Stay the night. Tomorrow we will speak again. With that, he rose and left the lodge, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers. Grey Feather moved closer, seating herself where Jacob had been. Eagle Eye tests you as he tested your father. Be patient. I don't have time for tests, Rebecca said, frustration edging her voice. The Prescotts are already moving against me. If I don't reach the mine soon, if you rush blindly, you will never reach it at all, Grey Feather interrupted with gentle firmness. Thunder Canyon forgives no mistakes. Jacob knows every stone, every passage. Without him, the map is merely paper. Rebecca knew the old woman was right, but the knowledge did little to ease her impatience. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Dr. Bennett and Lizzie would be growing worried. My companions, she began, have been invited to join us. Grey Feather assured her, no harm will come to them here. True to her word, as darkness fell, both Dr. Bennett and Lizzie Wilson were escorted to the lodge. They entered with the caution of those unsure of their welcome, but Grey Feather greeted them with dignified hospitality, offering food and places by the fire. You found Eagle Eye, Lizzie observed, settling beside Rebecca. He found me, Rebecca corrected, but I'm not sure he'll help. Dr. Bennett accepted a bowl of stew from one of the younger women. What does he want in return? To be certain of my intentions, whatever that means. Lizzie nodded as if this made perfect sense. Jacob doesn't trust easily anymore, not since Fort Wilson. The night deepened around Eagle's Rest, stars emerging in a sky unmarred by the smoke of town chimneys. Rebecca lay awake long after the others had drifted to sleep, her mind racing with questions. What test would Jacob set for her? How would she prove worthy of his trust? And if she did reach Whispering Peaks, what then? She was still pondering these questions when dawn broke over the eastern ridges. Jacob returned as the settlement was coming to life, the morning routines of its people unfolding around them. Come, he said simply, gesturing for Rebecca to follow. He led her to the edge of the settlement, where a narrow trail wound upward toward a rocky outcropping. They climbed in silence, Jacob moving with the sure-footed ease of one who knew every handhold, Rebecca following carefully in his wake. The outcropping provided a commanding view of the valleys below. In the distance, Rebecca could just make out the smudge on the horizon that was Copper Ridge. Look, Jacob instructed, pointing not toward the town, but to the west, where the rugged silhouette of Black Mesa dominated the landscape. What do you see? Rebecca studied the vista, the mesa, Thunder Canyon cutting through it, the territory beyond. Jacob shook his head slightly. You see landmarks, geographical features. Look deeper. Rebecca tried again, forcing herself to look beyond the obvious. The early morning light played across the landscape, creating a mosaic of shadow and illumination. The way the light moved across the canyons reminded her of water flowing over stone. "It's alive," she said suddenly, understanding dawning. "The whole landscape, it's like a living thing. The canyons are like veins carrying water, the forests like lungs breathing." Jacob nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "That's what your father came to understand. The land isn't just something to be claimed or owned. It exists in balance. Disturb that balance carelessly, and the consequences echo far beyond the point of disturbance." "What does this have to do with Whispering Peaks?" "Everything." Jacob turned to face her fully. "The gold your father found isn't just metal to be extracted. It's part of the mountain's heart. Taking it without understanding its place in the greater whole has consequences." Rebecca frowned. "Are you saying I shouldn't mine it at all?" "I'm saying there are right ways and wrong ways to approach such endeavors. Your father learned this. He planned to extract the gold with minimal disturbance, to work in harmony with the mountain rather than against it." He studied her face. "Before I show you the way to Whispering Peaks, I need to know, will you honor his vision, or will the promise of wealth blind you to the wisdom he gained?" Rebecca thought carefully before answering. Her father had always been more than just a prospector. He had been a student of the natural world, respectful of its mysteries in ways most miners weren't. "I want to continue what he started," she said finally. "Not just finding the gold, but finding it his way." Jacob nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then it's time you saw what he discovered." He reached into his shirt and withdrew his half of the map again. "We leave at midday. The journey will take 3 days if the weather holds." D. When they returned to the settlement, Rebecca found Dr. Bennett deep in conversation with one of the Comanche healers, exchanging knowledge of medicinal plants. Lizzie was helping some of the younger women with the morning chores, her initial awkwardness giving way to the easy competence that defined her. "Jacob has agreed to take me to Whispering Peaks," Rebecca announced. Dr. Bennett looked up, concern evident in her eyes. "Just you and him? Is that wise?" "I'll be going too," Lizzie interjected before Rebecca could respond. "I know those canyons almost as well as Jacob does." Jacob, who had followed Rebecca back to the lodge, inclined his head slightly. 3 is a good number for such a journey, but we must move quickly and quietly. The Prescotts have ears everywhere." "How could they possibly know we're here?" Dr. Bennett asked. "Gold has a way of opening eyes that were previously blind," Jacob replied cryptically. "We should assume they're already searching." His prediction proved more accurate than any of them could have imagined. As they prepared to depart, one of the settlement's hunters returned with urgent news. Riders were approaching from the south. 6 men, heavily armed, led by someone matching Charles Prescott's description. "How did they find us?" Rebecca demanded, helping Lizzie secure supplies to their horses. "They didn't find us specifically," Jacob said, checking his rifle. "They're searching methodically, following the most likely routes into the high country. Sooner or later, they would have come this way." "We need to leave before they arrive," Lizzie urged. Jacob shook his head. "They would spot us crossing the open ground to the north. Better to wait until they come, then slip away while Grey Feather keeps them occupied." "They could hurt someone," Rebecca protested. "Prescott is many things, but not foolish enough to provoke the Comanche in their own settlement," Jacob assured her. "He'll ask questions, make threats perhaps, but he won't risk open violence. Not here." They concealed their packed horses in a stand of trees behind the settlement and waited. Within the hour, the riders appeared on the same ridge Rebecca had climbed that morning with Jacob. They paused there, surveying Eagle's Rest, before beginning their descent. From their hiding place, Rebecca could clearly see Charles Prescott at the head of the group. He had his father's handsome features, but none of his polish. His was the brutality of youth, untempered by experience or restraint. The riders entered the settlement. their horses' hooves raising dust that caught the midday sun. The Comanche continued their daily activities, giving the newcomers only passing glances, though Rebecca noticed the women had gathered the children closer to the lodges. Greyfeather emerged from her dwelling, standing tall and dignified as Charles dismounted and approached her. "We're looking for a woman," his voice carried clearly in the still air. "Rebecca Miller. We have reason to believe she passed this way." Greyfeather's response was too quiet to hear, but her body language suggested polite indifference. Charles's frustration was evident even at a distance. "This isn't a social call, old woman. The woman I'm looking for has stolen property belonging to my father. Helping her makes you an accomplice." One of the Comanche men stepped forward, a hunter in his prime, his hand resting casually near the knife at his belt. He spoke briefly to Greyfeather, who replied with a small gesture that seemed to restrain him. "This settlement has seen no white woman." Greyfeather's voice rose clearly this time. "You have asked your question and received your answer. Now you will leave." Charles's hand moved to his gun belt. "We'll leave when I'm satisfied you're not hiding her." What happened next demonstrated why Eagle Eye had earned his reputation. A single shot rang out, not from within the settlement, but from somewhere in the rocks above. The bullet kicked up dust inches from Charles's boot. Every man in Prescott's party drew their weapons, looking wildly around for the source of the shot. A voice called down from the rocks, Jacob's voice, though he remained invisible among the stone. "The next one won't miss, Prescott. These people have answered your questions. Show respect and ride on." Charles squinted up at the rocks, fury evident in every line of his body. "Eagle Eye? Is that you, Indian? My father will pay well for information about the Miller woman. I guide people through canyons, not to their deaths," Jacob replied. "Leave now while you still can." For a tense moment it seemed Charles might order his men to search the settlement anyway. Rebecca held her breath, acutely aware that any violence here would be her responsibility. Eventually, prudence overcame Charles's anger. With a final threatening look at Greyfeather, he remounted his horse. "This isn't finished. When we find the woman, and we will, anyone who helped her will answer to my father." The riders departed, taking the western trail that would eventually loop back toward Copper Ridge. As soon as they were out of sight, Jacob materialized beside Rebecca and Lizzie. "We need to move now," he said. "They'll circle back once they're sure no one's following." They retrieved their horses and bid hasty farewells to Greyfeather and Dr. Bennett, who would return to Copper Ridge by a different route to avoid Prescott's men. "Be careful," Dr. Bennett urged, embracing Rebecca quickly. "Remember why you're doing this." "I will," Rebecca promised. Greyfeather approached, pressing something into Rebecca's hand, a small leather pouch containing what felt like herbs. "For clarity," the old woman explained, "when the stones begin to sing." Then they were off, Jacob leading them not north toward Black Mesa as might be expected, but east along a nearly invisible game trail that hugged the base of the foothills. They rode hard for several hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Eagle's Rest. When they finally stopped to rest the horses in a sheltered gulch, Lizzie voiced the question that had been bothering Rebecca. "How did Prescott track us so quickly? Someone must have talked." Jacob nodded grimly. "The stable hand at the boarding house, perhaps, or someone who saw you leaving town with Dr. Bennett. Or perhaps someone closer," Rebecca suggested, thinking of Deputy Thompson's warning about Sheriff Grant's divided loyalties. "Doesn't matter now," Jacob said practically. "What matters is staying ahead of them. Once we enter Thunder Canyon, we'll have the advantage. Few know its passages as I do." They continued eastward until sunset, then turned abruptly north, following a dry creek bed that wound between towering sandstone formations. They made camp in a cave-like overhang, building only the smallest of fires, well shielded from distant eyes. As darkness settled around them, the vastness of the territory became apparent in the blanket of stars overhead. Rebecca found herself wondering if her father had camped in this very spot, on his own journey to Whispering Peaks. "How did you and my father become allies?" she asked Jacob, as they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "You said you distrusted him at first." Jacob was silent so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative. "Your father came to these mountains like most white men, seeing only what could be taken, not what should be preserved. But unlike most, he was willing to learn. Learn what? That the land speaks if you know how to listen." Jacob poked at the small fire with a stick. "We met when he was lost in Thunder Canyon during a storm. I guided him to safety. After that, he sought me out, asked me to teach him the old ways of reading the mountains." Lizzie, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. "I remember my father mentioning that, how Thomas Miller had gone native, spending more time with the Comanche than in town." Jacob's expression tightened slightly at the phrase. "He walked between worlds, as I once did." It was that willingness to see beyond his own understanding that led him to Whispering Peaks. "And the gold," Rebecca prompted. "Was almost secondary to him by then," Jacob said, surprising her. He was more fascinated by the singing stones, the strange formations that create music when the wind passes through them. He believed they were markers left by the ancient ones who first worked the mine. Rebecca tried to reconcile this vision of her father with the man she remembered, driven certainly, but always focused on proving his claims about the gold mine. "That's not how he wrote to me," she said. "His letters were all about the strike he was about to make, how it would restore our family's fortunes." Jacob's eyes reflected the firelight. "Perhaps he knew what would bring you to these mountains. Or perhaps different truths exist for different ears." The cryptic response left Rebecca unsettled as they settled down to sleep, taking turns keeping watch through the night. Dawn found them already riding, Jacob setting a brisk pace as they approached the looming wall of Black Mesa. By mid-morning, they reached the mouth of Thunder Canyon, a narrow cleft in the mesa's southern face that widened into a labyrinthine system of interconnected passages. The canyon earned its name honestly. Even on this clear day, the wind funneling through its stone corridors created a continuous rumbling echo reminiscent of distant thunder. Rebecca could only imagine how it would sound during an actual storm. Jacob dismounted at the entrance, studying the ground with the focused attention of a man reading a text. "Two groups have passed this way recently," he announced. "One yesterday, Prescott's men most likely, and another—" He frowned, crouching to examine a partial footprint. "What is it?" Lizzie asked, her hand moving instinctively to her rifle. "Someone else is searching for Whispering Peaks," Jacob said, rising. "Someone who knows enough to travel with minimal trace." "Another prospector," Rebecca suggested. Jacob's expression was grave. "Perhaps. Or someone your father may have trusted with partial knowledge. Either way, we must be even more cautious now." They continued on foot, leading their horses through the canyon entrance. The temperature dropped immediately as high stone walls cut off the direct sunlight, leaving them in a world of shifting shadows and unexpected echoes. The main passage soon divided, branching into 3 separate corridors that looked nearly identical to Rebecca's untrained eye. Jacob studied the completed map briefly, then chose the rightmost path without hesitation. "How can you be sure?" Rebecca asked. "The map is only part of the guidance," Jacob explained. "Your father and I developed other markers." He pointed to what appeared to be a natural arrangement of stones near the canyon wall, 3 smaller rocks balanced atop a larger one. "I don't see anything unusual about those rocks," Lizzie commented. "Exactly," Jacob said with the ghost of a smile. The best trail signs are those that appear completely natural to anyone who doesn't know to look for them. As they ventured deeper into the canyon's maze, Rebecca began to understand why few ever found their way through it. The passages twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing until they had to lead the horses single file, other times opening into small boxed canyons that offered multiple exits, each looking as likely as the next. Without Jacob's guidance, they would have been hopelessly lost within the first hour. Even with the map, the complexity of the canyon system was overwhelming. Yet Jacob moved with absolute certainty, identifying their route through subtle markers that would have been invisible to anyone not initiated into their meaning. By late afternoon, they had penetrated deep into Black Mesa's heart. The quality of the light had changed, taking on an amber hue as the sun sank toward the western horizon. That was when Rebecca first heard it. A faint musical tone that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. She reined in her horse, listening intently. "Do you hear that?" Jacob nodded. The singing stones were getting close. The sound was unlike anything Rebecca had ever experienced, not quite wind through rock formations, not quite the resonance of struck crystal, but something between the two. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, rising and falling with the canyon's natural acoustics. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Some find it so," Jacob agreed. "Others find it maddening. The longer you listen, the more it seems to form patterns, almost like voices having a conversation just below the threshold of understanding." They made camp that night in a small side canyon. The singing sound a constant companion that somehow intensified in the darkness. Rebecca found it difficult to sleep, not because the sound was unpleasant, but because it seemed to stir something deep within her. Memories, emotions, half-formed thoughts that slipped away when she tried to focus on them. "My father wrote about this," she whispered to Jacob during his watch shift. "I thought he was being poetic, or perhaps losing his grip on reality. But it's real. More real than most are prepared to accept," Jacob confirmed. "The stones have been singing since before my people came to these lands. The old ones believed they contained spirits, ancestors offering guidance to those worthy of hearing it." "And what do you believe?" Jacob was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable in the dim starlight that filtered down from above. "I believe there are forces in this world that exist beyond our understanding. Whether we call them spirits or science matters less than how we respond to them." Rebecca thought about this as she tried once more to sleep. The singing seemed to have shifted subtly, becoming almost like a lullaby. This time she drifted off, her dreams filled with strange landscapes and her father's voice calling from just beyond the next ridge. Morning brought a new challenge. As they prepared to continue their journey, Jacob discovered fresh tracks, a single person on foot, moving with purpose through the canyon. "Made early this morning," he concluded, studying the impressions in the sandy soil. "Someone who knows exactly where they're going." "How is that possible?" Lizzie asked. "You said only you and Thomas knew the way." Jacob's expression darkened. Apparently, Thomas shared his knowledge with someone else. Someone he didn't tell me about. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "We need to hurry." They moved with greater urgency now, Jacob setting a pace that tested both horses and riders. The singing stones grew louder as they advanced, their tones shifting from the gentle harmonies of the previous day to something more urgent, almost warning. By midday, they reached a section of the canyon where the walls narrowed dramatically, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through single file. The passage twisted sharply, then opened suddenly into a broad, circular basin surrounded by towering cliffs. Rebecca gasped at the sight that greeted them. The basin was filled with stone formations unlike any she had seen before, slender spires of red sandstone rising from the ground like fingers reaching for the sky. Each was perforated with small, irregular holes, positioned in such a way that when the wind passed through them, they created the singing sound she had been hearing. But it was what lay beyond the stone forest that truly captured her attention. Set into the far cliff face was an opening, clearly not natural, but carved with precision into the living rock. Above it, weathered but still legible, was a single word, whispering. "We found it," she breathed, her heart racing with a mixture of triumph and awe. "My father's mine." Jacob held up a hand in warning. "We're not alone." As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the shadow of the mine entrance. A man of medium height, dressed in the practical clothing of a prospector, a rifle held casually but unmistakably at the ready. Even at this distance, Rebecca recognized him immediately. The sandy hair, going prematurely gray at the temples, the neat beard, the spectacles that gave him a scholarly appearance at odds with the frontier setting. "Harold Jenkins?" she exclaimed, in disbelief. The shopkeeper from Copper Ridge inclined his head in acknowledgement, his rifle remaining steady. "Miss Miller, I've been expecting you." Jacob's hand moved toward his own weapon, but Jenkins shook his head. "I wouldn't, Eagle Eye. I'm rather a good shot, despite appearances." "How did you get here?" Rebecca demanded, still struggling to reconcile the mild-mannered shopkeeper with the armed man before them. "How did you know about the mine?" Jenkins smiled thinly. "Your father and I were partners, Miss Miller. Silent partners, you might say. Who do you think financed his expeditions all those years? Who kept his supplies flowing when everyone else in town wrote him off as a madman?" "Hagu never mentioned you in his letters." "Of course not." Thomas was cautious to a fault. "Wrote everything as if someone might be reading over his shoulder." Jenkins gestured with his free hand toward the mine entrance. "But he told me enough to find my way here when the time came." Rebecca felt a growing sense of betrayal. Had her father lied to her all these years? Had his final instructions to find Jacob been merely another layer of deception? "If you were his partner," she said carefully, "then you know the mine belongs to both our families." Jenkins's laugh held no humor. "Oh, I'm not here to claim ownership, Miss Miller. I'm here to ensure the mine never operates at all." "What?" The word escaped Rebecca in a shocked exhale. "Your father didn't understand what he'd found," Jenkins continued, his voice taking on an almost evangelical quality. "He was too blinded by the gold. But I saw the truth in his journals, in the specimens he brought back." "What truth?" Jacob asked, his voice level despite the tension in his posture. Jenkins gestured to the singing stones around them. "This place isn't natural. These formations weren't shaped by wind or water. They were created by the same ancient hands that carved the mine entrance." "Created by whom?" Rebecca pressed. "A civilization lost to time, one that understood forces we can barely comprehend." Jenkins' eyes gleamed with a fervor that made Rebecca deeply uneasy. "The gold is merely a byproduct. The real treasure is the knowledge they left behind." Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Jacob, whose subtle headshake warned her not to challenge Jenkins's increasingly unhinged statements directly. "My father's journals," she said instead. "You've read them." "Every page." Pride colored Jenkins's voice. "Thomas trusted me with them when he realized what was at stake, when he understood that some discoveries are too dangerous to be made public." A piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Rebecca. "You searched my room at the boarding house." Jenkins nodded, looking for the map. "I needed to reach the mine before anyone else, before Prescott, before you, to protect what lies within." "By destroying it?" Lizzie asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the basin. "If necessary." Jenkins shifted his weight, and Rebecca noticed something she hadn't before, a canvas sack at his feet, bulging with what could only be dynamite. This place must remain hidden, the singing stones undisturbed. The situation had escalated beyond anything Rebecca had anticipated. Not only was she confronting an armed man who clearly teetered on the edge of reason, but he had come prepared to obliterate the very discovery she had traveled so far to claim. "Harold," she said gently, using his first name deliberately, "my father wouldn't want this. Whatever he discovered, he meant for me to continue his work, not destroy it." For a moment, doubt flickered across Jenkins's face. "You don't understand. What's at stake?" "Then help me understand," Rebecca urged, taking a careful step forward. "Show me what my father showed you." Jenkins hesitated, his rifle lowering slightly. "The carvings inside. They tell a story, a warning." Jacob moved slowly to Rebecca's side. "What kind of warning?" Before Jenkins could respond, a new sound cut through the singing of the stones, the distant echo of hoofbeats. Multiple riders approaching fast. "Prescott," Jacob said grimly. Jenkins's expression hardened again. "You led them here." "No," Rebecca protested. "They must have followed your trail just as we did." The shopkeeper's face twisted with sudden decision. "Then there's no more time." He reached down for the sack of dynamite. What happened next occurred with such speed that Rebecca would later struggle to piece the sequence together. Jacob lunged forward with startling quickness. Jenkins brought his rifle up. Lizzie shouted a warning. Then a shot rang out, not from any of them, but from the canyon entrance behind them. The bullet struck the rock wall above Jenkins's head, sending stone fragments scattering. Everyone froze as Charles Prescott's voice echoed through the basin. "Nobody move. Next one won't miss." Rebecca turned to see Prescott and 4 of his men spread out across the canyon entrance, rifles trained on their small group. Charles himself stood slightly ahead of the others, his handsome face twisted with triumph. "Well, well," he called, his voice magnified by the basin's acoustics. "Quite a gathering. The Miller woman, the Indian scout, the Wilson girl, and..." His eyes narrowed as he recognized the shopkeeper. "Harold Jenkins? Now that is unexpected." Jenkins had ducked behind one of the larger stone formations, his rifle and the sack of dynamite clutched close to his chest. "This doesn't concern you, Prescott," he shouted. "Leave while you still can." Charles laughed, the sound harsh and grating against the more melodious tones of the singing stones. "I've been tracking you all for days. I think that makes it very much my concern." His gaze settled on Rebecca, especially when it leads to Thomas Miller's fabled gold mine. Jacob had moved slightly, positioning himself where he could see both Prescott's men and Jenkins. His hand hovered near his weapon, but he was too experienced to draw against such overwhelming odds. "There are forces at work here you don't understand," Jenkins called, desperation edging his voice. "The only force that matters is my father's company," Charles replied coldly, "and the future of this territory." He gestured to his men. "Secure them." As Prescott's men advanced, the tension in the basin crystallized into a moment of decision. Rebecca caught Jacob's eye, a silent question passing between them. His nearly imperceptible nod told her what she needed to know. He wouldn't surrender without a fight, despite the odds. Lizzie had shifted her position, using their horses as partial cover, her own rifle now in her hands, though not yet raised. What happened next unfolded like a sequence from a fever dream. Jenkins emerged from behind the stone formation, but instead of surrendering, he lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite. "Stay back!" he screamed, the burning fuse sputtering in his hand. Prescott's men faltered, momentarily confused by this unexpected development. "He's bluffing!" Charles shouted. "Take him!" Jenkins hurled the dynamite toward the advancing men. It landed short, but the explosion when it came was deafening, amplified by the basin's walls. Stone fragments and dust erupted in a choking cloud. The moment of chaos was all Jacob needed. He drew his weapon with lightning speed, firing twice. One of Prescott's men fell, clutching his shoulder. Another dove for cover. Charles fired back, the bullet singing past Rebecca's ear. She ducked, drawing her own revolver as Lizzie provided, covering fire from behind the horses. Jenkins, seemingly consumed by a mission that transcended self-preservation, was scrambling toward the mine entrance, the sack of dynamite bouncing against his back. "Stop him!" Charles shouted to his remaining men. "Don't let him reach the mine!" Two of Prescott's men broke off, pursuing Jenkins across the basin floor. The shopkeeper turned and threw another lit stick of dynamite, forcing them to scatter. The explosion sent a shower of rocks tumbling from the canyon wall. Rebecca found herself caught in crossfire, pinned down behind one of the singing stone formations. The structure vibrated with each bullet that struck it, creating discordant tones that seemed to express the violence unfolding around it. Jacob appeared beside her, his movement so silent she hadn't heard his approach. "We need to stop Jenkins," he said urgently. "If he brings down that mine entrance, everything your father discovered will be lost forever." Rebecca nodded, trying to formulate a plan amidst the chaos. "Can you create a diversion, something to draw Prescott's attention?" Before Jacob could respond, Lizzie joined them, dust coating her face and clothes. "The horses bolted in the explosion," she reported. "If we survive this, we'll have a long walk home." "First things first," Rebecca said grimly, peering around the stone formation. Jenkins had nearly reached the mine entrance, pursued by one of Prescott's men. Charles and the others were still focused on their position. Jacob checked his ammunition. "I'll draw them east, toward those larger formations. You two go after Jenkins." "That's suicide," Lizzie protested. "Only if I let them catch me," Jacob replied with a grim smile. "Go, now." With that, he darted from their cover, firing two quick shots that forced Charles and his remaining men to duck. Then he was running, moving with the fluid grace of someone who knew exactly how to use terrain to his advantage, disappearing among the singing stones on the basin's eastern side. Prescott's men took the bait, pursuing Jacob with single-minded determination. Charles hesitated, looking between Jacob's escape route and the mine entrance. With a curse, he chose to follow his men after Jacob, apparently trusting his other men to handle Jenkins. "Now," Rebecca urged, and she and Lizzie broke from cover, running in a crouched posture toward the mine entrance. They were halfway there when a shot rang out. Rebecca turned to see Lizzie stumble, blood blossoming on her upper arm. "Keep going," Lizzie gasped, pushing Rebecca forward with her good hand. "I'm right behind you." The lone gunman who had remained to guard their flank was advancing, reloading as he came. Lizzie turned, raising her rifle one-handed, and fired. The man dropped, clutching his leg. Rebecca reached the base of the cliff just as Jenkins disappeared into the mine entrance. The remaining Prescott man who had been pursuing him lay unconscious, or dead nearby. Rebecca couldn't tell which and had no time to check. Lizzie caught up, her face pale but determined. "How bad is it?" Rebecca asked, glancing at her wounded arm. "Through and through," Lizzie replied through gritted teeth. "I'll live. Jenkins won't if he tries to collapse that mine with us in it." The mine entrance was surprisingly well constructed, a timber-reinforced tunnel cutting straight into the cliff face. Thomas Miller had clearly spent considerable time ensuring its stability. Just inside, a series of oil lamps hung from hooks driven into the support beams. Rebecca lit one, its glow revealing a passage that extended deeper than the light could penetrate. "Jenkins!" she called, her voice echoing down the tunnel. "Harold, we need to talk!" No response came, but the scuffing of boots on stone told. Hurry was still moving ahead of them. "Be careful!" Lizzie warned as they advanced. "He's not thinking clearly." The tunnel descended at a gentle grade, following what must have been a natural fissure in the mesa. The air grew cooler and damper as they proceeded, the sounds of the gunfight outside fading behind them. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when the passage widened abruptly into a large chamber. Rebecca raised the lamp, its light revealing, a sight that momentarily drove all thoughts of pursuit from her mind. The chamber walls were covered with carvings, intricate patterns and symbols that seemed both alien and strangely familiar. They glowed with a faint phosphorescence in the lamplight, creating the illusion that they were moving, shifting like creatures underwater. In the center of the chamber stood Harold Jenkins, the sack of dynamite at his feet, staring up at the carvings with an expression of reverent fear. "Do you see now?" he whispered as they approached. "Do you understand what your father discovered?" Rebecca moved closer, mesmerized by the patterns that seemed to swirl and dance in her peripheral vision, yet remained static when she looked directly at them. "What are they?" she asked, her voice hushed by the chamber's solemn atmosphere. "Messages," Jenkins replied, "left by those who came before, those who found what lies beyond this chamber." "The gold," Lizzie said, keeping her rifle trained on Jenkins despite her injured arm. "Not just gold." Jenkins shook his head emphatically. "Something far more significant. Your father translated parts of these inscriptions, Rebecca. He came to believe they tell of a substance within the gold, something the ancients called the breath of the mountain." Rebecca studied the carvings more closely. Now that her eyes had adjusted, she could see that among the abstract patterns were recognizable images, human figures, celestial bodies, and what appeared to be maps of the surrounding territory. "These are star charts," she realized, pointing to one section of the wall. "And here, these are the canyons, but different somehow, as if viewed from above." Jenkins nodded eagerly. "Your father believed these people had knowledge far beyond their time. They understood things about the earth, the stars, the very fabric of existence that we're only beginning to glimpse." "And the gold?" Rebecca pressed. Jenkins's expression darkened. "A byproduct of their work, but one with properties, unusual properties." "What kind of properties?" Lizzie demanded, her patience clearly wearing thin with Jenkins's cryptic explanations. Instead of answering directly, Jenkins reached into his pocket and withdrew a small nugget. In the lamplight, it gleamed with a strange iridescence, shifting colors in a way that ordinary gold never did. "Your father gave me this," he said, holding it out to Rebecca. "A sample from the deepest part of the mine. Look closely." Rebecca took the nugget, surprised by its unusual lightness. As she examined it, she noticed that the colors continued to shift even when she held it still. Blues, greens, and purples playing across its golden surface like oil on water. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I don't understand." "It changes. People," Jenkins interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Those who handle it too long, who breathe the dust when it's processed. Your father noticed it happening to himself. Subtle changes at first, heightened senses, vivid dreams. Then, more profound alterations." "Alterations?" Rebecca looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Jenkins glanced nervously at the passage leading deeper into the mine. He began to know things he couldn't possibly know. Future events, past secrets, as if the metal itself was somehow connected to something beyond our understanding. Lizzie made a skeptical noise. "Sounds like the ravings of a man who spent too much time alone in these mountains." "That's what I thought too," Jenkins admitted. "Until I started experiencing the same phenomena after handling the samples he gave me. Dreams so real, they couldn't be distinguished from waking. Intuitions that proved uncannily accurate." Rebecca looked again at the nugget in her palm. Could there be truth to Jenkins's claims? Her father's letters had grown increasingly mystical in his final years, filled with observations and insights that had seemed poetic rather than literal. Had he been trying to prepare her for this discovery? "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "then why destroy the mine? Shouldn't this knowledge be studied, understood?" Jenkins shook his head vehemently. "Your father came to believe the ancients sealed this place for a reason. The inscriptions contain warnings about those who sought to harness the metal's power for their own gain, about catastrophes that followed." "Fairy tales," Lizzie scoffed, "meant to scare off the superstitious." "Perhaps," Jenkins conceded. "But your father wasn't superstitious, yet he became convinced the mine should remain closed. That's why he never filed a formal strike claim, despite finding more gold than any man could spend in 10 lifetimes. Rebecca returned her attention to the wall carvings, noticing now that some depicted what could indeed be interpreted as calamities: stylized figures consumed by fire, landscapes split by massive fissures. "If my father wanted the mine sealed," she said carefully, "why did he send me the map? Why direct me to Jacob for the missing piece?" Jenkins's expression softened. "Because he knew you wouldn't believe any of this without seeing it for yourself. Because he hoped you would reach the same conclusion he did, but through your own journey." A distant explosion interrupted their conversation, reminding them sharply of the conflict still unfolding outside. Dust drifted down from the chamber ceiling. "Jacob," Lizzie said worriedly, "we need to help him." Rebecca nodded, her mind racing. The situation had grown far more complex than a simple matter of claiming her father's mine. If Jenkins was telling the truth, if even half of what he claimed was accurate, then the gold of Whispering Peaks represented something far beyond financial prosperity. "Show me the rest," she said to Jenkins. "The deeper workings your father discovered. I need to see everything before I decide what should happen to this place." Jenkins hesitated, clearly torn between his mission to seal the mine and his desire to convince Rebecca of the truth of his claims. "There's not much time," he warned. "Prescott and his men are occupied with Jacob," Lizzie finished. "But not for long. Make your case quickly, Jenkins." The shopkeeper nodded reluctantly. "This way. But stay close and touch nothing but what I tell you is safe." He led them deeper into the mine, past the carved chamber and into a narrower passage that sloped more steeply downward. The air grew noticeably warmer, and a faint melodic hum became audible, similar to the singing stones outside, but deeper, more resonant. The passage eventually opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, but even more remarkable. The walls here weren't carved. They were lined with veins of the same iridescent gold, forming patterns that pulsed with inner light. The humming sound emanated from these veins, creating harmonies that seemed to respond to their presence. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table or altar, its surface covered with objects that Rebecca recognized as her father's tools. A journal, specimens carefully labeled and arranged, measuring instruments. "His workshop," Jenkins explained, "where he conducted his studies of the metal's properties." Rebecca approached the table, running her fingers lightly over her father's journal. The familiar handwriting brought a surge of emotion: grief for his loss, pride in his discoveries, and a growing sense of responsibility for what came next. The journal's final entries confirmed much of what Jenkins had told them. Thomas Miller had indeed become convinced that the gold of Whispering Peaks was unlike any metal previously discovered. He documented his experiences with meticulous scientific precision: the dreams, the intuitions, the gradual expansion of his awareness. But he had also documented something Jenkins hadn't mentioned: his experiments with refining the gold, separating what he called the essence from the base metal. The process he described was complex, combining techniques from metallurgy, chemistry, and what appeared to be practices derived from the wall carvings themselves. He successfully isolated it, Rebecca realized, looking up from the journal. The substance that causes these effects. Jenkins nodded grimly. A small amount, enough to prove his theories, not enough to be dangerous. He kept it contained. He pointed to a small wooden box on the far side of the table, inlaid with silver, symbols that match some of the wall carvings. Rebecca moved toward it, but Jenkins stopped her with a raised hand. "Don't open it," he warned. "Not here, not now. Your father sealed it for good reason. The pure essence is far more potent than the trace amounts found naturally in the gold." Lizzie, who had been examining the chamber while keeping a wary eye on Jenkins, spoke up. "This doesn't explain why you're so determined to destroy the mine. If the gold is dangerous, wouldn't it be better to control access, study it under safer conditions?" Jenkins laughed hollowly. That was Thomas's initial plan too, until he received a visitor. "What visitor?" Rebecca asked. "Maxwell Prescott himself," Jenkins replied. "About 2 months before your father died, Prescott had heard rumors about unusual gold being found in the region. He came to Thomas with an offer, funding, equipment, protection, all in exchange for a partnership. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. My father refused. Of course, he already understood enough about the gold's properties to know what someone like Prescott might do with it, the power it could represent. In the wrong hands. Jenkins' voice dropped lower. "A week later, your father's cabin was searched while he was away. Some of his notes were taken, though not his main journal or the most critical findings." "You think Prescott was behind it?" Lizzie said. "It wasn't a question." Jenkins nodded. "Thomas became convinced Prescott would stop at nothing to gain control of the mine. That's when he split the map, sent half to you for safekeeping, and entrusted the other half to Jacob. And arranged for you to destroy the mine if Prescott ever got too close," Rebecca concluded, the pieces falling into place. "Yes." Jenkins met her gaze directly. "Your father died of pneumonia, Rebecca, but he was already dying from exposure to the refined essence. His final act was to ensure this power wouldn't fall into the hands of men like Prescott." Another explosion sounded closer this time. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. "They're blasting their way in," Lizzie warned, moving toward the passage. "We're out of time." Rebecca made a swift decision. "We take my father's journal and the box, nothing else." Jenkins looked stricken. "You're not going to seal the mine?" "Not without understanding exactly what we're dealing with," Rebecca replied firmly. "My father was a scientist as well as a prospector. He would want us to make decisions based on complete knowledge, not fear." Jenkins seemed about to protest, but another blast, closer still, settled the matter. "Very well," he conceded, "but I pray you don't come to regret this choice." As Rebecca carefully placed the journal and the sealed box in her satchel, Lizzie called from the passage entrance, "Someone's coming!" Rebecca and Jenkins hurried to join her. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the direction they had come. "Back this way," Jenkins urged, pointing deeper into the mine. "There's another exit, a vertical shaft that comes out on the mesa top. Your father used it for ventilation." They retreated further into the labyrinth of passages, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The tunnel branched repeatedly, Jenkins navigating the turns with the confidence of someone who had studied the layout extensively. Finally, they reached a chamber where a shaft of daylight pierced the darkness from above. A crude ladder of wooden rungs embedded in the rock wall led up toward the surface, some 30 feet overhead. "You first," Rebecca told Lizzie, whose wounded arm was now a significant liability for climbing. As Lizzie began the ascent, moving slowly but determinedly, Jenkins turned to Rebecca. "I need to go back. Set charges at key structural points. Buy you time." "That's suicide," Rebecca protested. Jenkins smiled sadly. "My life hasn't mattered much these past years. But this protecting your father's discovery. This matters. The Prescotts cannot be allowed to control what lies in this mine. Before Rebecca could argue further, the sound of a gun being cocked echoed in the chamber. They turned to see Charles Prescott standing in the passage entrance, rifle aimed squarely at them. Blood streaked one side of his face from a cut above his eye, and his clothing was torn and dust-covered. "Nobody is destroying anything," he said coldly, "especially not a mine worth more than this entire territory." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Jenkins began. "Oh, but I do," Charles interrupted, his smile chilling. "My father has been researching Thomas Miller's special gold for months. We know exactly what it can do and what it will be worth to the right buyers." Rebecca's mind raced. How much did the Prescotts truly know? Had they somehow obtained more of her father's research than Jenkins realized? "Where's Jacob?" she demanded, trying to buy time as Lizzie continued her painful climb toward the surface. "Your Indian friend gave us quite a chase." Charles's smile widened unpleasantly. "Last I saw, he was pinned down with my men closing in. Brave, but ultimately foolish." Jenkins had slowly shifted position, placing himself between Charles and the shaft where Lizzie was now nearly at the top. Rebecca realized he was creating cover for their escape, a final sacrifice. "You won't leave this mine alive, Prescott," Jenkins said, his voice steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through him. "Not with what you've done." Charles laughed dismissively. "Always the dramatic one, weren't you, Harold? All those years playing the simple shopkeeper while financing Thomas Miller's wild hunts. Did you really think no one noticed?" While they talked, Rebecca had been inching toward the ladder, staying in Jenkins's shadow. If she could just reach it before Charles decided to end the conversation. "I notice everything in my territory," Charles continued, his rifle unwavering. "Every whispered deal, every secret partnership. My father built Silver Peak by knowing what others tried to hide." "Your father built nothing," Jenkins shot back, anger overcoming caution. "He stole land, manipulated markets, destroyed anyone who stood in his way. And for what? To control a valley that was never his to claim?" Charles's expression hardened. "Enough talk. Step aside, both of you. The mine belongs to Silver Peak now." "No," Jenkins said simply, his hand moving to his pocket, where Rebecca knew he kept his smaller dynamite charges. "It belongs to the mountain." What happened next unfolded with terrible swiftness. Jenkins withdrew a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth, a short fuse already attached. Charles fired, the bullet striking Jenkins in the chest. As he fell, the shopkeeper managed to strike a match against the rough stone floor, lighting the fuse. "Run!" he gasped to Rebecca, blood bubbling at his lips. Rebecca lunged for the ladder, scrambling upward, as Charles rushed forward to grab the dynamite from Jenkins's weakening grip. She was halfway up when the explosion came, not the devastating blast she had expected, but a sharp crack followed by an ominous rumbling. Jenkins had set off a controlled charge. Not enough to seal the mine completely, but sufficient to collapse the passage behind them, buying precious time. Rebecca continued climbing, emerging finally onto the mesa top where Lizzie waited, her face pale with pain and worry. Below them, dust billowed from the shaft opening, carrying the sounds of falling rock and Charles Prescott's distant curses. "Jenkins?" Lizzie asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Rebecca shook her head, grief tightening her throat. Harold Jenkins had been many things, her father's secret partner, a man driven to extremes by what he believed, perhaps even misguided in his methods. But in the end, he had given his life to protect a truth he deemed greater than himself. "We need to move," Lizzie urged, glancing around the mesa top. Prescott's other men could be anywhere. The mesa stretched before them, a relatively flat, Expanse of red rock, dotted with scrub vegetation. In the distance, thunderheads were building, promising an afternoon storm, appropriate accompaniment to the tempest they had just survived below ground. "Which way?" Rebecca asked, disoriented after their underground journey. Lizzie studied the horizon, then pointed northwest. "Eagle's Rest is that direction. 2 days hard walk, maybe 3 with my arm like this." Rebecca nodded, adjusting. The satchel, containing her father's journal and the mysterious box. The weight of what she carried felt suddenly enormous, not just physically, but in terms of responsibility. Whatever secrets the mine held, they were now at least partially in her keeping. They had walked perhaps half a mile across the mesa when a figure appeared ahead, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Both women tensed, reaching for weapons, then relaxed as the figure resolved into a familiar shape. "Jacob," Rebecca breathed in relief. The scout approached, moving with a slight limp but otherwise appearing unharmed. His expression was grim as he took in their condition: Lizzie's bandaged arm, the dust covering Rebecca's clothes, the absence of Jenkins. "Prescott's men," he asked simply. "2 dead that I saw," Lizzie reported, "including Jenkins. Charles was in the mine when Jenkins collapsed part of it. Don't know about the others." Jacob nodded, processing this information with his characteristic economy. "I led 3 away from the basin. They won't be following us." He didn't elaborate, and neither woman asked for details. Some things were better left unspoken in the aftermath of violence. "We need to keep moving," Jacob said, glancing at the sky. "Storm coming. Need shelter before it hits." As they resumed walking, Rebecca filled Jacob in on what they had discovered in the mine. The carvings, her father's workshop, Jenkins' claims about the gold's unusual properties, and the box she now carried. Jacob listened without interruption, his expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Your father told me some of this," he admitted finally. "Not all. He believed certain knowledge should be earned, not given." "Did you believe him?" Rebecca asked. "About the gold's effects?" Jacob's gaze was distant, focused on memories only he could see. "I've lived long enough to know there are forces in this world beyond simple understanding. Whether they come from the earth or the stars or somewhere else entirely matters less than how we respond to them." The first raindrops began to fall as they reached the mesa's edge, where a steep trail descended toward the canyon floor. The storm was approaching faster than expected, dark clouds roiling overhead. "We'll shelter in those caves," Jacob said, pointing to a series of openings visible in the canyon wall about halfway down. "Wait out the worst of it." As they made their careful descent, the rain intensified, turning the trail slick and treacherous. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning illuminated the landscape in stark flashes of brilliance. Rebecca found herself thinking of the singing stones, wondering if they changed their tune during storms like this. The thought led to another. If her father's theories were correct, if the gold truly possessed the properties Jenkins had described, what did that mean for her? For the future of Copper Ridge? For the delicate balance Jacob had spoken of? These questions accompanied them as they finally reached the cave entrance, ducking inside just as the heavens truly opened, sending sheets of water cascading down the canyon walls. The cave was shallow but dry, offering a perfect vantage point to watch the storm's fury. As Jacob built a small fire from deadwood stored in a back corner, evidence that he had used this shelter before, Rebecca carefully removed the wooden box from her satchel. In the flickering firelight, the silver inlays seemed to shift and dance, reminiscent of the iridescent gold they had seen in the mine. The box itself was simple in construction, but beautiful in its craftsmanship. Clearly her father's work. "Should you open that?" Lizzie asked, watching Rebecca with concern as she tended to her own wound. "If not now, when?" Rebecca countered. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." Jacob looked up from the fire, his expression solemn. Some knowledge changes those who receive it. Are you prepared for that possibility? The question gave Rebecca pause. Was she ready to cross the threshold her father had crossed? To potentially experience the same phenomena that had led him to such extraordinary conclusions about the nature of reality? Lightning flashed outside, throwing their shadows against the cave wall in grotesque elongation. In that moment of illumination, Rebecca made her decision. "My father sent me here for a reason," she said quietly. "Not just to find his mine, but to continue his work, whatever that entails." With careful fingers, she unlatched the box and lifted the lid. Inside the wooden box lay a small glass vial sealed with wax, containing what appeared to be golden dust suspended in clear liquid. The particles caught the firelight, swirling with the same iridescent colors Rebecca had noticed in the nugget Jenkins had shown her. Beside the vial was a folded piece of paper, her father's handwriting immediately recognizable. "A letter," Rebecca whispered, carefully unfolding it with trembling fingers. Jacob moved closer, positioning himself where he could see the vial without touching it. Lizzie remained by the cave entrance, dividing her attention between the storm outside and the strange scene unfolding within. Rebecca began to read aloud, her voice blending with the sound of rain hammering the canyon outside. "My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, then you have found Whispering Peaks and discovered what lies within it. I had hoped to share this journey with you in person, to guide you through the marvel and the burden of what I have uncovered. Fate, it seems, had other plans. What you hold is what I have come to call Mountain's Breath, the essence separated from the iridescent gold. After many attempts, I succeeded in distilling it to this concentrated form. Even this small amount represents years of work. Its properties defy conventional understanding. In its natural state within the gold, it produces subtle effects, enhanced awareness, heightened intuition, dreams of unusual clarity. But in this purified form..." Rebecca paused, noting a change in her father's typically precise handwriting. The next lines were shakier, as if written under strain. In this purified form, it creates a connection I struggle to describe scientifically. The closest explanation I can offer is that it somehow bridges perception across time, allowing glimpses of what was, what is elsewhere, and sometimes what may yet be. I do not suggest it grants the power to see the future definitively. Rather, it seems to expand awareness beyond normal constraints. I've experienced visions of possible paths diverging and converging like rivers in a delta. Some paths appear more substantial than others, suggesting greater likelihood, but none are fixed. This power comes at a cost. Extended exposure affects physical health, headaches, fever, eventually more severe symptoms. I have limited my contact to protect myself, but I fear the damage is already significant. More concerning are the effects on one's sense of self. The expanded awareness can fragment identity, blurring the boundary between observer and observed. Jenkins believes the mind should be destroyed, the knowledge buried forever. Perhaps he is right, but I cannot bring myself to erase a discovery of such magnitude. Instead, I entrust the decision to you, my daughter. You have always possessed judgment I admired, a balance of curiosity and caution, imagination and practicality. If anyone can determine the right course for this discovery, it is you. Should you choose to continue my work, proceed with extreme caution. Never handle the essence directly. Dilute it further if you attempt any experiments. And above all, remember that knowledge without wisdom is a dangerous thing indeed. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. The journey that brought you to this moment has already proven your strength and determination. With love and faith, your father, Thomas Miller. Rebecca carefully refolded the letter, her mind racing with implications. The cave was silent, save for the storm outside and the soft crackling of their small fire. He made no mention of Prescott, Lizzie noted, breaking the silence. No warning about protecting the mine from outside interests. Perhaps he believed that would be obvious, Jacob suggested. Or perhaps his concern was more with the essence itself than who might exploit it. Rebecca stared at the vial, the golden particles continuing their hypnotic dance within the liquid. "What would you do?" she asked Jacob. "If the decision were yours?" The scout considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I would ask first, what good can come from this knowledge, and what harm? Both answers matter." Lightning flashed, momentarily turning the cave entrance into a blinding rectangle of white. In that flash, Rebecca thought she saw something, a figure standing at the cave mouth. But when her vision cleared, there was only Lizzie, peering. Out at the storm. "Someone's coming," Lizzie announced suddenly, raising her rifle despite her injured arm. Multiple riders, moving fast despite the rain. Jacob was on his feet instantly, moving to the cave entrance with fluid grace. "Prescott's men," he confirmed grimly. 6, perhaps 7, they must have found a way up from the basin. Rebecca quickly returned the vial and letter to the wooden box, securing it in her satchel. "We can't outrun them in this storm." "No," Jacob agreed, "but we can choose our ground." He studied the canyon outside, calculation evident in his posture. "There's another cave system half a mile north, more defensible, connected passages that offer escape routes." "Can we reach it without being seen?" Rebecca asked, already gathering their sparse belongings. Jacob nodded. "If we move now, while the rain is heaviest. The path runs close to the canyon wall, difficult to spot from a distance." They extinguished the fire and slipped out into the driving rain. The storm had transformed the canyon into a volatile landscape of rushing water and treacherous footing. They moved as quickly as conditions allowed, Jacob leading, Rebecca in the middle, and Lizzie bringing up the rear despite her injury. The east path Jacob chose kept them tight against the canyon wall, partially sheltered by an overhanging ledge. Even so, they were thoroughly soaked within minutes, the cold rain seeping through clothing and chilling skin. Behind them, shouts could be heard over the storm's fury. Prescott's men had reached their abandoned shelter and discovered signs of their recent presence. "Faster," Jacob urged, helping Rebecca navigate a particularly slippery stretch where water cascaded down the canyon wall. They had nearly reached the northern cave system when disaster struck. A massive lightning bolt hit somewhere nearby, the thunderclap following instantly. The ground beneath them shuddered, and part of the path ahead collapsed into the growing torrent below. "Back!" Jacob shouted, pulling Rebecca away from the crumbling edge. But retreat was no longer an option. Through the curtain of rain, they could see riders approaching, dark silhouettes against the storm's grey backdrop. "There!" Lizzie pointed to a narrow ledge that still connected to the far side, perhaps 2 feet wide at its narrowest point. Jacob assessed it quickly. "It will hold, one at a time. You first, Rebecca." Rebecca didn't argue. Clutching her satchel tightly, she stepped onto the ledge, moving sideways with her back pressed against the canyon wall. The roar of water below was deafening, the spray adding to the rain already soaking her. Halfway across, a bullet struck the rock near her head. One of Prescott's men had spotted them and opened fire despite the challenging conditions. "Keep moving," Jacob called, returning fire to provide cover. Rebecca forced herself to continue, fighting panic as more bullets pinged around her. Finally, she reached the far side, ducking into a shallow recess in the canyon wall. Lizzie was next, her wounded arm making the crossing even more precarious. She was nearly across when a section of the ledge gave way beneath her. With a cry of alarm, She lunged forward, barely catching the remaining edge with her good arm. Rebecca rushed forward, grabbing Lizzie's wrist and pulling with all her strength. For a terrifying moment, it seemed insufficient. Then, Jacob appeared, beside her, having made his own crossing with remarkable speed. Together, they hauled Lizzie to safety just as more gunfire erupted behind them. "This way," Jacob directed, leading them into the northern cave system, a series of interconnected chambers that penetrated deep into the canyon wall. Unlike their previous shelter, these caves showed signs of ancient habitation. Smoke-darkened ceilings, fragments of pottery embedded in the dirt floor, and faded pictographs on the walls. Jacob navigated the passages with the certainty of one who had explored them thoroughly, leading Rebecca and Lizzie deeper until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They finally stopped in a large chamber with multiple exits. A small natural pool had formed in one corner, fed by water trickling down through fissures in the ceiling. "We're safe for now," Jacob said, checking Lizzie's reopened wound with gentle fingers. The passages form a maze. Without knowledge of the layout, pursuers would become lost. "Charles won't give up easily," Rebecca warned, wringing water from her soaked hair. "Not with what's at stake." "No," Jacob agreed, "but the storm works in our favor. It will wash away our tracks, make visual tracking impossible until it passes." Lizzie winced as Jacob rebandaged her arm using strips torn from his own shirt. "What's our plan? We can't stay in these caves forever." Rebecca withdrew her father's wooden box from the satchel, checking that water hadn't penetrated its tight seams. The responsibility it represented weighed on her more heavily with each passing hour. "We need to return to Copper Ridge," she said, finally, "with evidence of what the mine contains, what my father discovered." "Evidence won't matter if Prescott controls the town," Lizzie pointed out. "His father's influence runs deep." "Then we need allies," Rebecca countered, "people willing to stand against the Prescotts. There must be others who resent their control, who would support an alternative." Jacob had moved to one of the cave walls, studying the ancient pictographs with focused attention. "Your father believed these were created by the same people who made the carvings in the mine," he said, tracing a symbol that resembled those Rebecca had seen in the chamber of singing stones. "What happened to them?" she asked, joining him at the wall. "Why did they disappear?" "Not all mysteries have answers," Jacob replied. "But your father had theories. He believed they were not originally from this land, that they came from elsewhere to mine the special gold, then departed when their work was complete." "From elsewhere?" Lizzie sounded skeptical. "Where? California? Mexico?" "From much farther away," Jacob said simply. "At least that was Thomas's belief after studying their astronomical carvings." Rebecca stared at the pictographs with new interest. Among the abstract patterns and animal forms were circular designs with radiating lines, perhaps representations of the sun or stars or something else entirely. "You think my father believed they came from the stars?" she said. Not a question, but a realization. That would explain why he became so secretive, so careful about who he shared his discoveries with. Jacob didn't confirm or deny her interpretation. What matters now is what you believe and what you intend to do with that belief. The question hung between them as they settled in for an uncomfortable night. The storm continued unabated outside, its fury occasionally penetrating even the depths of their shelter as distant thunder reverberated through the stone. Rebecca slept fitfully, her dreams filled with strange imagery. Singing stones that spoke with human voices, golden light that flowed like water, carvings that moved and shifted when not directly observed. She woke several times, disoriented, the boundary between dream and reality momentarily blurred. During one such awakening, she found Jacob watching her from across the small fire he had built. "The essence affects you even without direct contact," he observed quietly. "Your father's blood runs in your veins. Perhaps that creates a connection." Rebecca sat up, troubled by the implication. "You think I'm somehow especially susceptible to its influence? Or especially capable of understanding it," Jacob suggested. Thomas believed the latter. Morning brought a temporary respite from the storm. The rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle, and patches of blue were visible between the clouds. They took advantage of the improved conditions to continue their journey, Jacob leading them through a series of connected caves that eventually emerged on the canyon's northern rim. From this vantage point, they could see much of the surrounding territory: the dark mass of Black Mesa to the south, the distant smudge that was Copper Ridge to the east, and closer at hand, the network of canyons and mesas that formed the region's distinctive landscape. "No sign of pursuit," Lizzie reported, scanning their back trail with the practiced eye of a hunter. "They'll still be searching," Jacob cautioned. "Prescott's not a man to abandon a prize like Whispering Peaks." Rebecca had been unusually quiet. Since awakening, her mind preoccupied with the strange dreams of the night before and their possible significance. As they began their journey toward Copper Ridge, she finally voiced the question that had been forming since reading her father's letter. What if the mine isn't just about gold? What if it's about something more fundamental, a different way of understanding reality itself? Jacob glanced at her with an unreadable expression. "That kind of thinking led your father down a solitary path. A path that may have been correct," Rebecca countered. "What if the ancient people who created those carvings weren't mining gold for its monetary value, but for its perceptual properties? What if they understood something about reality that we've forgotten or never knew?" Lizzie shook her head. "Sounds dangerously close to what drove Harold Jenkins to try blowing up the whole operation." "No," Rebecca insisted. "Jenkins wanted to destroy the mine out of fear. Fear of what might happen if people like the Prescotts controlled it. I'm talking about understanding it, studying it, learning from it in a controlled, methodical way." "And who would do this studying?" Jacob asked. "Who would you trust with such power?" The question gave Rebecca pause. In truth, she hadn't thought that far ahead. Her immediate concern had been protecting her father's discovery from those who would exploit it without understanding its true nature. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know it shouldn't be the Prescotts." Their journey toward Copper Ridge was slow but steady. Jacob led them along ridgelines and through hidden valleys, avoiding the more traveled routes where they might encounter Prescott's men. By late afternoon, they had covered perhaps half the distance to town. They made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a small spring, taking advantage of the continued break in the weather. As Lizzie prepared a meager meal from the provisions Jacob carried, Rebecca returned to her father's journal, reading more deeply into his observations about the iridescent gold. The scientific portions were meticulously documented: chemical analyses, physical properties, experimental protocols. But interspersed were passages of a more speculative nature, written as if Thomas Miller was working through ideas that challenged his understanding of natural law. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "The phenomenon I've termed temporal resonance appears consistently in my tests with the refined essence. When properly prepared and observed under specific conditions, the particles seem to exist in multiple states simultaneously, not unlike the wave-particle duality described in recent physics journals, but on a macroscopic scale." Lizzie looked up from the small fire she was tending. "What does that mean in plain English?" Rebecca frowned, considering how to translate the technical language. "I think he's saying that the essence doesn't follow normal rules of cause and effect, that it somehow exists across time rather than solely in the present moment." "Like your dreams last night," Jacob observed quietly. Rebecca nodded slowly. If I'm understanding correctly, my father believed the essence could serve as a kind and then bridge between different points in time, not physical travel, but a form of perception that transcends our normal linear experience. Sounds like madness, Lizzie said bluntly. No offense to your father's memory. Many scientific breakthroughs seemed like madness when first proposed, Rebecca countered. Electricity, magnetism, the idea that invisible organisms cause disease. The line between visionary insight and delusion is often drawn by history, not contemporaries. Jacob had been listening silently, his expression thoughtful. Your father was not a man given to fantasy, he said finally. If he believed he had discovered something that defied conventional understanding, I am inclined to consider the possibility seriously. They resumed their journey at first light, reaching the outskirts of Copper Ridge by mid-afternoon. Rather than entering town directly, Jacob led them to a small cabin, hidden in a stand of cottonwoods, a mile from the settlement's edge. My place, he explained simply. We'll be safe here while we decide our next move. The cabin was sparse, but well-maintained, consisting of a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding a modest collection of books, many more than Rebecca would have expected. You read, she observed, noting titles on geology, astronomy, native languages, and surprisingly, modern physics. Knowledge exists in many forms, Jacob replied. I take what is useful from multiple traditions. Lizzie had gone to the window, checking the approach to the cabin. What now? We can't just walk into town. Prescott will have men watching for us. Rebecca placed her father's box and journal on the table, symbolic of the decision point they had reached. We need to know what's happened in our absence, whether Dr. Bennett returned safely. What story the Prescotts are telling about our disappearance? Jacob nodded. I can enter town without drawing attention. People see what they expect to see, and no one expects an Indian to matter. The bitter edge to his words reminded Rebecca of the painful history that had shaped his perspective, his position as someone who moved between worlds but was fully accepted by neither. I'll go after dark, he continued. Find Dr. Bennett if possible. The hours of waiting were difficult for Rebecca. Now that they had reached relative safety, the full impact of recent events was catching up to her. Jenkins's death, the revelations about her father's discoveries, the implications of what she had learned in the mine. As evening approached, she found herself drawn again to her father's journal, particularly his documentation of experiments with the essence. One passage captured her attention fully. My most significant observation occurred during the 3rd trial with diluted essence. I had been focusing on a crystalline formation within the test solution when I experienced what I can only describe as perceptual displacement. For approximately 47 seconds, as measured by my assistant's observation, though it seemed much longer to me, I perceived events occurring in my laboratory from multiple perspectives simultaneously, as if viewing the room from several positions at once. More remarkably, I became aware of events slightly before they occurred, fraction of seconds, but unmistakable precognition. When a beaker fell from the shelf, I had already begun moving to catch it before it visibly began to fall. This suggests the essence somehow permits consciousness to operate outside normal temporal constraints. The implications are staggering. If perception can extend beyond the present moment, even slightly, it challenges our most fundamental assumptions about causality and free will. Rebecca closed the journal, troubled and fascinated in equal measure. If her father's observations were accurate, if the essence truly allowed some form of perception across time, then Whispering Peaks contained something far more valuable than gold. It held the potential to transform humanity's understanding of reality itself, and that made it infinitely more dangerous in the wrong hands. Jacob left at nightfall, moving like a shadow into the gathering darkness. Rebecca and Lizzie remained at the cabin, maintaining only a small fire to minimize the risk of detection. "Do you really believe it?" Lizzie asked as they waited. "All this talk of seeing through time and such?" Rebecca chose her words carefully. "I believe my father was a rational, methodical scientist who documented what he observed. Whether his interpretations were correct, I can't say with certainty. But I've experienced enough strange dreams and intuitions since coming into proximity with the essence to keep an open mind. And if it is real, what then?" "That's the question that matters most," Rebecca acknowledged. "Such knowledge could transform our understanding of the universe, but it could also be weaponized, exploited, used to manipulate and control." Lizzie nodded grimly. "And men like the Prescotts specialize in exploitation." The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Rebecca found herself repeatedly checking her father's box, reassuring herself that the vial of essence remained secure. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and distant coyotes answered with their eerie chorus. It was well past midnight when Jacob returned, accompanied by Dr. Bennett. The physician looked exhausted but unharmed, her practical clothes dusty from travel. "Thank God you're all right," she said, embracing Rebecca with unusual emotion. "When I reached town and heard the rumors, I feared the worst." "What rumors?" Rebecca asked, helping her to a seat by the fire. Dr. Bennett's expression darkened. "According to Maxwell Prescott, you three ambushed his son's expedition, killed 2 of his men, and kidnapped Charles himself. There's a reward for information, leading to your capture, dead or alive." "That's absurd," Lizzie protested. "We were defending ourselves." "Truth matters little when Prescott controls the narrative," Jacob said quietly. "Tell her the rest, Sarah." Dr. Bennett hesitated, her exhaustion momentarily overshadowed by obvious concern. "They found Jenkins's body in the mine, and Maxwell Prescott has filed legal papers claiming ownership of Whispering Peaks. He's presenting documentation supposedly signed by your father, Rebecca, a partnership agreement giving Silver Peak Mining controlling interest in any discoveries." Rebecca felt a cold fury rising within her. "Forgeries. My father would never have partnered with Prescott." "Of course they're forgeries," Dr. Bennett agreed. "But with the sheriff in Prescott's pocket and no counter-evidence beyond your word, they'll likely stand in territorial court." "What about Charles?" Lizzie asked. "You said they're claiming we kidnapped him." "No one's seen him since your expedition to Black Mesa," the doctor replied. "Some whisper he might actually be dead, with his father using the kidnapping story to justify a manhunt." Jacob, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Charles Prescott is alive, or was when we left the mine. Jenkins collapsed the passage, but there were other ways out." Rebecca paced the small cabin, her mind racing. "So Maxwell Prescott is using our absence to seize legal control of the mine while portraying us as murderers and kidnappers, and no one in town is challenging this version of events." "Few have the courage," Dr. Bennett said sadly. "The Prescotts have spent years ensuring most people in Copper Ridge depend on them in one way or another. For employment, for loans, for protection. Those who might speak out fear reprisals." "Not everyone," Jacob interjected. "There are whispers of discontent, small acts of resistance, the seeds of something that could grow given the right conditions." Rebecca stopped pacing, a decision crystallizing in her mind. "Then we need to create those conditions. We need to expose the truth about my father's discovery, about the Prescott's deception, about everything that's happened." "How?" Lizzie asked practically. "We can't just walk into town and announce it." "No," Rebecca agreed, "but we can build our case methodically, gather evidence, find allies, Create a foundation strong enough that when we do come forward, people will have to listen. Dr. Bennett studied her with concern. That's dangerous work, Rebecca. The Prescotts won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their plans for the mine. I know, Rebecca acknowledged, but my father dedicated his life to understanding what lies in Whispering Peaks. I won't let his discovery become another tool for men like Maxwell Prescott to expand their power. Jacob had moved to the cabin's single window, looking out at the star-filled sky. If we choose this path, we must be prepared to go further than we initially intended. The Prescotts' influence extends beyond Copper Ridge. They have connections throughout the territory, business partners, political allies, paid informants. Then we'll need to build influence of our own, Rebecca replied, conviction growing with each word, starting with those who already have reason to oppose the Prescotts. The conversation continued long into the night, evolving from initial reactions into a tentative strategy. Dr. Bennett provided crucial information about potential allies in Copper Ridge, people who had suffered under the Prescotts' regime but retained some measure of independence. Jacob suggested reaching out to communities beyond the town, ranchers, independent miners, native settlements, building a coalition based on shared interest in limiting the Prescotts' expansion. As dawn approached, Rebecca felt exhaustion pulling at her, but also a growing sense of purpose. The path ahead would be difficult, dangerous, and uncertain. But for the first time since discovering her father's mine, she had a clear direction, not just to protect his legacy, but to ensure his discovery served a greater purpose than mere enrichment. She was about to suggest they all get some rest, when a sound outside froze them in place, the unmistakable clink of a rifle being cocked. "Come out with your hands visible," a voice called from the darkness. "We have the cabin surrounded." Jacob moved silently to the window, peering carefully through a crack in the shutters. His expression told Rebecca everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Prescott's men," he confirmed grimly. "At least 6 that I can see. Probably more hidden in the trees." Rebecca quickly gathered her father's journal and box, securing them in her satchel. "Is there another way out?" Jacob nodded, moving to the stone fireplace. "Tunnel beneath the hearth comes out in the creek bed 100 yards east." Lizzie had already doused the fire, and Jacob now worked quickly to lift a stone slab concealed in the fireplace floor, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. "You 3 go," he said, retrieving his rifle from beside the door. "I'll create a diversion." "We go together," Rebecca insisted, unwilling to leave anyone behind after Jenkins' sacrifice. "There's no time to argue," Jacob replied, his voice firm but gentle. "The tunnel is too narrow for more than one person at a time. You need head start. I know these woods better than anyone. I'll join you at the meeting point we discussed." Dr. Bennett was already helping Lizzie into the tunnel, the younger woman's injured arm making the descent awkward. Rebecca hesitated, torn between practical necessity and loyalty. "Go!" Jacob urged again as another shout came from outside. "Your father's work must survive. You must survive to complete it." With reluctance, Rebecca slipped into the tunnel, descending into cool darkness as Jacob replaced the stone slab above her. The passage was indeed narrow, a tight crawl space that required moving on hands and knees through damp earth. She could see nothing, but could sense Dr. Bennett and Lizzie ahead of her, moving as quickly as the confined space allowed. Behind them, muffled by earth and stone, came the sound of gunfire. Jacob creating the diversion he had promised. Rebecca forced herself to keep moving forward despite her concern for him, trusting his knowledge of the terrain and his survival skills. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through suffocating darkness, Rebecca felt cool air on her face. The tunnel widened, and suddenly she was emerging onto the damp sand of a creek bed. partially concealed by overhanging willows. Dr. Bennett helped her to her feet, and they quickly took stock of their situation. The creek provided a natural path away from the cabin, its course cutting through dense undergrowth that would shield them from view. "This way," Lizzie indicated, pointing downstream. Jacob said to follow the creek to the fork, then take the eastern branch. They moved as quickly as conditions allowed, wading through shallow water to avoid leaving tracks on the banks. The sounds of conflict at the cabin faded behind them, replaced by the gentle burbling of the creek and the first bird songs of dawn. As light began filtering through the trees, revealing their surroundings in grey detail, Rebecca found herself thinking of the vial nestled in her satchel. The essence her father had distilled represented not just scientific discovery, but potentially a new understanding of reality itself, a different relationship between consciousness and time. Such knowledge would change everything if properly understood and applied. Or it could become the ultimate instrument of control in the wrong hands, a means of anticipating opponents' moves, manipulating events with foreknowledge, perhaps even altering the course of history itself. The responsibility was overwhelming. Yet as they continued their journey through the awakening landscape, Rebecca felt a growing certainty that this was the path she had been meant to follow, not just to honor her father's memory, but to ensure his discovery served humanity rather than those who would exploit it. The sun was just cresting the eastern ridges when they reached the fork in the creek. As they turned onto the eastern branch as instructed, Lizzie suddenly raised her hand. In warning, "Someone's following us," she whispered, her keen hunter's senses detecting what the others had missed. They froze, listening intently. The morning was still, the only sounds the gentle flow of water and distant bird song. Then came the faint but unmistakable crack of a branch breaking under weight. Someone moving through the undergrowth with less skill than Jacob would have employed. "One person, I think," Lizzie murmured, moving carefully but not silently enough. "Prescott's man?" Dr. Bennett suggested. "Possibly," Rebecca replied, "or someone else entirely. The territorial wilderness harbored many dangers beyond Prescott's. Hired guns, outlaws, renegades, desperate men of various descriptions. We can't outrun them in our condition," Lizzie said practically, gesturing to her wounded arm and their general state of exhaustion. Rebecca made a swift decision. "Then we choose our ground there." She pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead, where the creek bent sharply around a natural stone barrier. "We can see them coming, but remain partially concealed." They moved quickly to the position, Lizzie and Rebecca preparing their weapons, while Dr. Bennett gathered stones as additional projectiles if needed. The minutes stretched with excruciating slowness as they waited, straining to detect any further sounds of approach. When the follower finally appeared, emerging from the willows upstream with cautious movements, Rebecca felt a shock of recognition that momentarily paralyzed her. It was Charles Prescott, but not the imperious, confident man who had confronted them at the mine. This Charles was haggard, his fine clothes torn and mud-stained, his handsome face scraped and bruised. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone nursing injuries, one arm held close to his body as if protecting cracked ribs. More shocking still was his appearance. His hair had turned completely white. Rebecca raised her weapon instinctively, but there was something in Charles Prescott's demeanor that stayed her finger on the trigger. He moved not with the predatory confidence of a hunter, but with the wariness of the hunted. "I mean no harm," he called out, clearly having spotted them despite their partial concealment. "I need to speak with you, Miss Miller, about what happened in the mine." Lizzie kept her rifle trained on him. "That's close enough, Prescott." Charles stopped, raising his hands slowly to show he was unarmed. The morning light accentuated the shocking transformation of his appearance, not just the prematurely white hair, but a haunted quality in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "What happened to you?" Rebecca demanded, not lowering her own weapon. "The essence happened," he replied, his voice hoarse. "After Jenkins collapsed the passage, I was trapped deeper in the mine. I found your father's workshop, the specimens he'd collected." His expression contorted with remembered horror. "I thought I could handle it, prove myself to my father by bringing back something more valuable than gold." Dr. Bennett studied him with professional interest. "You were exposed to the concentrated essence." Charles nodded, a tremor visibly running through him. 3 days I was trapped before finding another way out. 3 days with visions, things no man should see. He met Rebecca's gaze directly. "Your father was right about everything." Rebecca exchanged glances with her companions. Charles's transformation seemed too profound to be mere deception, yet caution was essential. "Why follow us?" she pressed. "Why not return to your father?" "Because he can never know what truly exists in that mine," Charles answered with unexpected vehemence. "I've seen what he would do with such power. I've seen every possible outcome." His voice broke slightly. "None of them end well for anyone." This wasn't the arrogant, cruel Charles Prescott who had pursued them through Thunder Canyon. This was a man fundamentally altered by experience, speaking with the fervor of genuine conviction. "The mine must be sealed," he continued, "permanently. Jenkins was right all along." Rebecca studied him intently, searching for any sign of deception. "And we're supposed to believe you've had a complete change of heart? That you no longer wish to claim Whispering Peaks for your father's company?" "Believe what you will," Charles replied wearily, "but the man who entered that mine no longer exists. What I experienced there..." He shuddered visibly. "Imagine seeing every choice you've ever made, and its consequences laid bare. Every cruelty, every selfish act, every moment of weakness, all visible in perfect clarity, without the comfortable lies we tell ourselves." Dr. Bennett moved closer, her physician's instincts overriding caution. "Your physical symptoms, the hair color change, the tremors, how long have they been present?" "Since I emerged," Charles answered, "along with headaches, periods of disorientation. Sometimes I lose time, find myself in places with no memory of how I got there." The symptoms matched Thomas Miller's descriptions of extended essence exposure. Rebecca felt her suspicion giving way to a reluctant belief in Charles's transformation, though not necessarily in his trustworthiness. "What exactly do you want from us?" she asked. "An alliance," he said simply. "Against my father. He's mobilizing everything to secure the mine. Legal maneuvers, hired guns, political pressure. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with, and he wouldn't care if he did. And you expect us to trust you?" Lizzie's tone made clear her skepticism. Charles's laugh held no humor. "Trust? No. But we share a common goal now, keeping the essence out of my father's hands." He paused, his expression darkening. "There's something else you should know. Your Indian friend was captured during the firefight at the cabin." Rebecca felt her heart sink. "Jacob. They're taking him to town. My father intends to make an example of him. A show trial for the alleged murder of Prescott men, followed by a public hanging. We have to help him," Rebecca said immediately. "That's exactly what my father expects," Charles warned. "He's using Eagle Eye as bait to draw you out." Rebecca's mind raced, weighing their limited options. Jacob had risked everything to help her reach Whispering Peaks, to protect her father's discovery. She couldn't abandon him now. "Tell us what you know about your father's plans," she said to Charles. "Every detail." As the sun climbed higher, They formulated a desperate counteroffensive. According to Charles, Maxwell Prescott had called in every favor, every connection throughout the territory. Copper Ridge was effectively under Silver Peak control. The sheriff, the judge, most of the business owners all aligned with Prescott interests, willingly or through coercion. Jacob's trial is scheduled for tomorrow, Charles explained. A mere formality before the sentence. The execution would follow the next day. We need allies, Rebecca insisted. People willing to stand against your father. There are some, Dr. Bennett offered. Michael Thompson, the deputy sheriff, has been quietly questioning the official narrative. Samuel Wilson and his daughter Lizzie have influence among the independent homesteaders. The Chinese merchants from Silver City have no love for Silver Peak. After your father's attempts to seize their claims, separately they're vulnerable, Rebecca nodded. Together, they might create enough resistance to give us a chance. Charles looked doubtful. You're talking about open opposition to the most powerful man in the territory. Most people won't risk it without compelling reason. Then we give them one, Rebecca said, determination hardening her voice. She reached into her satchel, withdrawing. Her father's journal. Evidence of the Prescott's deception. Proof that my father never signed any partnership agreement. And testimony about what really happened at Whispering Peaks. Your word against my father's, Charles pointed out. In a court he effectively controls. Not just my word, Rebecca countered, looking meaningfully at Charles himself. Your testimony would change everything. Charles fell silent, the internal struggle visible on his face. To publicly oppose his father would mean burning bridges permanently, sacrificing his inheritance, his position, everything he had been raised to value. The visions showed me what I become if I continue on my father's path, he said finally. I've seen that man. I won't become him. Indeed, with their course decided, they separated to implement their desperate plan. Dr. Bennett returned to town openly, resuming her medical practice as if nothing had happened, while quietly contacting potential allies. Lizzie set out for her father's homestead to rally the independent settlers. Charles, whose changed appearance would raise immediate questions, remained hidden in an abandoned line shack to avoid discovery. Rebecca took the most dangerous task, entering Copper Ridge itself, in disguise to assess Jacob's situation firsthand. With her hair dyed dark using walnut hulls and dressed in clothes borrowed from Dr. Bennett, she slipped into town as dusk fell, passing unrecognized among the evening crowd at the Copper Nugget Saloon. The conversations around her confirmed their worst fears. Maxwell Prescott had indeed orchestrated a complete takeover, framing her absence as proof of guilt. Jacob was being held in the jail under heavy guard. The so-called trial, a mere pretext for a punishment designed to intimidate anyone who might oppose Silver Peak's expansion. More disturbing still were the rumors about Whispering Peaks itself. Work crews were being assembled, equipment gathered. Prescott planned to begin full-scale mining operations immediately after dealing with Jacob, eager to extract the iridescent gold before any outside authorities could intervene. As Rebecca left the saloon, a hand caught her arm, pulling her into the shadows between buildings. She reached for her concealed revolver, then stopped as she recognized Deputy Thompson's earnest face. "Miss Miller," he whispered. "Dr. Bennett said you might come. It's worse than you know. Prescott's bringing in more men, professional gun hands. From downriver. They arrive tomorrow morning." "Can you help us reach Jacob?" she asked. Thompson's expression was pained. "The sheriff watches me constantly, suspects my loyalty. But there's something else. Judge Harmon arrived this afternoon. He's an honest man, not in Prescott's pocket. If you had evidence, real evidence." A plan began forming in Rebecca's mind. Dangerous, with slim odds of success, but perhaps their only chance. Spread the word to those Dr. Bennett contacted. Tomorrow at noon, during Jacob's trial, they need to be ready. As dawn broke over Copper Ridge, tension hung in the air like the charged atmosphere before a storm. The courthouse, normally a sleepy building that doubled as a meeting hall, was surrounded by Prescott men, their presence an unsubtle reminder of who truly controlled the proceedings inside. Jacob was brought from the jail in chains, his face bruised, but his bearing dignified. He showed no surprise when Rebecca entered the courtroom among a crowd of townspeople, her disguise still intact. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication passing between them. Judge Harmon, a gray-haired man with a reputation for scrupulous adherence to legal procedure, called the court to order. Sheriff Grant read the charges: murder, conspiracy, theft of mining claims. His voice betraying discomfort with the role he had been assigned. Maxwell Prescott himself sat in the front row, impeccably dressed as always, his silver hair and patrician features projecting an image of righteous authority. He surveyed the proceedings with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. What happened next would be recounted in Copper Ridge for generations. As the prosecutor began his opening statement, the courthouse doors swung open. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Charles Prescott entered. His once dark hair now shockingly white, his appearance haggard, but his purpose evident in every line of his posture. "This proceeding is a sham," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And I cannot remain silent while an innocent man is condemned for my father's ambition." Maxwell Prescott rose, shock and fury warring on his face. "Charles, what is the meaning of this?" "The truth, Father," Charles replied, advancing down the center aisle. "Something in short supply in your enterprises." Judge Harmon banged his gavel. "Young man, you will observe the decorum of this court." "Your Honor," Charles continued, addressing the judge directly, "I request the opportunity to provide testimony regarding the events at Whispering Peaks Mine. Testimony that directly contradicts the charges against Jacob Redhorse." The courtroom erupted in whispers and exclamations. Maxwell Prescott moved toward his son, but stopped abruptly as Rebecca stood, removing her disguise. "I, too, have evidence pertinent to these proceedings," she announced, "including documentation proving that partnership agreement between my father and Silver Peak Mining is a forgery." Prescott's face darkened with rage. "This is outrageous. These people are fugitives wanted for the kidnapping of my son." "I wasn't kidnapped, Father," Charles said quietly. "I was enlightened. What followed was extraordinary." Charles's testimony about the events at the mine, corroborated by Rebecca's account and supported by Thomas Miller's journal entries. As they spoke, others began to step forward. Michael Thompson describing the pressure placed on the sheriff's office, Samuel Wilson recounting the systematic intimidation of independent settlers, Dr. Bennett presenting medical evidence contradicting Prescott's claims. Maxwell Prescott watched in mounting disbelief as his carefully constructed narrative collapsed. When he attempted to interrupt, Judge Harmon silenced him with unexpected firmness. "You will have your opportunity to respond. Mr. Prescott, for now you will listen." The final blow came when Charles produced documentation of his father's less legitimate business practices, evidence he had gathered over years as the presumed heir to the Silver Peak Empire. The papers detailed payoffs, threats, manipulated claim registrations, and more serious crimes. As the evidence mounted, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. People who had entered fearful and submissive straightened their backs, finding courage in collective revelation. Maxwell Prescott's power derived ultimately from their compliance, and that foundation was crumbling before his eyes. Judge Harmon, reviewing the accumulated evidence with methodical care, delivered his ruling with quiet authority. Jacob was released from custody. The forged partnership agreement was invalidated, and Maxwell Prescott himself was placed under arrest pending investigation of multiple criminal charges. "This isn't over," Prescott snarled as the sheriff, now following the judge's orders rather than Prescott's, led him from the courthouse. "You have no idea what forces you're challenging." "On the contrary, Father," Charles replied. "We understand those forces better than you ever could. The transformation of Copper Ridge didn't happen overnight. The networks of influence and dependency Prescott had established couldn't be dismantled in a day, or a week, or even a month. But with his arrest and the public exposure of his methods, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. As for whispering, Peaks itself, Rebecca made a decision that would have profound implications for the future. Rather than claiming the mine solely for herself, she established a research foundation, bringing together scientists, scholars, and wisdom keepers from multiple traditions to study the essence and its properties in a controlled, ethical context. My father believed this discovery could change our understanding of reality itself, she explained to Jacob as they stood at the entrance to the Singing Stones Basin. But such knowledge must be approached with humility and responsibility. Jacob nodded, his expression thoughtful. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous indeed. The ancients understood this. Perhaps we can learn from both their discoveries and their caution. Charles Prescott, transformed by his experience with the essence, became an unlikely ally in this effort. His knowledge of business operations proved valuable in creating legal protections for the Foundation, ensuring that no single entity, corporate, governmental, or individual, could gain exclusive control of the discovery. 5 years later, Rebecca stood again at the entrance to Whispering Peaks, listening to the melodic tones of the Singing Stones. The Foundation's careful research had confirmed many of her father's theories about the essence's properties, while establishing protocols to prevent the harmful effects of uncontrolled exposure. More importantly, the balanced approach had allowed Copper Ridge and the surrounding communities to prosper without falling into the boom and bust cycle that had ruined so many mining towns. The iridescent gold was extracted in small quantities, its value lying not in mass production, but in its unique properties and the knowledge derived from studying it. "Your father would be proud," Dr. Bennett remarked, joining Rebecca at the mine entrance. "Not just of what you've preserved, but of what you've built." Rebecca smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, from a daughter determined to vindicate her father's reputation to a pioneer in an entirely new field of science. The essence had indeed changed perception, though not in the way anyone might have predicted. He always said, "The true value of discovery lies not in what we find," she replied, "but in what we learn about ourselves in the process." As they turned to leave, the Singing Stones seemed to shift their tune slightly, the harmonies blending in a way that suggested approval. In Copper Ridge, they still tell the story of the woman they once called crazy, the woman who proved that the greatest discoveries often await those willing to look beyond what others can see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. Out!